read out. I'm going to try to close us today by 1 o'clock because we have a board meeting at 1 o'clock for the Caithness mental health pilot. So what I think I'll do with each item is take 2 or 3 contributions at a time and then come back to the officers for a response in little batches. So I appreciate everyone trying to be as succinct as possible and only speak once unless it's absolutely important. So I'll try and move us through the agenda as quickly as I can. So can we start with the roll call, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Councillor Bremner. Councillor Bremner. Councillor Donny Mackay.
Present.
Councillor Willie Mackay.
Here.
Councillor Mackey.
Present, Alex.
Present, Alex.
Councillor Rees.
Present, Alex. Good morning.
Councillor Rosie.
Morning, everyone. Present.
I have an apology from Councillor Andrew Sinclair. Councillor Nicola Sinclair.
Present.
Councillor Bremner, are you with us?
Yes, he is. Can you hear me?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Alex. I'll move to declarations of interest. I need to declare an interest as a director of Wexhart, which is a town development trust, and that's relevant to items 7, 8 and 10, but it's non-financial. Any other declarations of interest, please?
Yes, I'm here. Is anybody hearing me?
We are now, Raymond. You missed your name being called at first, but we're hearing you now. Do you have a declaration of interest?
No, yes, I'm declaring that I'm here. There we go. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, thank you. Carl.
Thanks, Nicola. Same declaration of interest in regard to being a trustee of Thurso Community Development Trust. The same numbers as yourself. Thank you.
Yes, I have a declaration of interest. Sorry, I should be a bit more with it this morning. Yeah, chair of Thurso Community Development Association.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all noted. We'll move on to the minutes. We have circulated minutes from the Caithness Committee meeting of 22nd October and 11th December, which were approved by Council on 29th October and 7th January. Are we all happy with those minutes?
Agreed.
Yep.
Okay, we'll move to item 4, the action tracker. Alex, would you mind just giving us a quick run through of the action tracker?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, members, item 4, issues to be included in future ASG reports. I'll have that as an item on our ward business meeting on the 15th of February. Item number 1 from 6 July. I have a one-to-one with the chair on the 2nd of February, and we'll start to get that arranged. Item 6, I'm not sure what the actual action was there, and it's got Ward 2 members, question mark. We can maybe look at that at the Ward Business meeting on the 15th of February, if that's okay with the Ward 2 members. Yep, thank you. And the last action from the meeting on 22nd October, the continued support, the refurbishment of Thurso Fire Station is there as an aid memoir, so it doesn't get lost. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks. On the fire station one, I'll look to talk to Ward 2 members and see if we can move that forward. That's fine. Members, are you content to move on to the next item, or any issues to raise under the action tracker? Okay, we'll move along. We're going to, with your permission, we're going to skip ahead, and the first substantive item we're going to take is the Caithness Horizons update, item 11, because I understand that Brian has another meeting to attend. So unless anyone has any objections, I'd like to invite Brian.
Morning,
Okay.
members.
Morning, Brian.
Morning. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to this paper today. I'd say thanks for taking it as an earlier item as well. That's much appreciated. I think it's fair to say Caithness Horizons has been closed for longer than I think any of us would have hoped for. Hopefully through this report, you see positive progress made over the recent period. with a particular focus following last year's lockdown to conclude some of the key building works and address outstanding compliance checks. We were actually reasonably well placed to look and plan for a reopening in spring of this year until the latest lockdown had hit. While that latest lockdown has clearly had an impact, I think as the report highlights, we are very much now into this sort of final phase of some of the building works, into the really the improvements rather than fabric of the buildings. HLH have been in, done a lot of assessment work pre-Christmas, looking at improvements to the cafe area, improvements to the Wi-Fi infrastructure. As the report highlights, those works progressing as we speak. The intent, I say, between the council, Highland and DSRL, we've been working in partnership. I say, despite the impact of the latest lockdown, is really to make sure that we're all as well placed as we possibly can be to get the facility reopened as soon as it's safe and permissible to do so. So that is very much the assurance I think we're trying to give you with this report today. I think it's fair to say that the scope of some of the building work was greater than I think perhaps we'd originally envisaged when we first took reports to committee on the project. And clearly the COVID lockdown, particularly last year, had a key impact, and it's beyond the impact the pandemic's had clearly across society. The timing has unfortunately impacted. Really, spring last year was the original window we were looking at reopening with the pandemic impacting, and I say now spring of this year. But I think we're well placed now that really we're looking at I think a relatively short lead time, assuming we can get the final works completed in the building as soon as we're in a position where we know in terms of COVID that we're in a position where it's safe and permissible to open the building. We're looking at a sort of 6 to 8 week, I think, lead time for Highland to complete the recruitment, staff training, get on board with a view to getting the doors reopened. So we clearly can't put a date on that because of the lockdown we're currently in. But again, hopefully that would give us some assurance that we feel we're sort of reasonably well placed to move reasonably quickly once we've got the green light to be able to do so. And again, as you'll note from the report, Highland's intent is very much a sort of new vision for the facility, which I know members have heard from past briefings. So, North Coast Visitor Centre is a rebranded facility once those doors reopen. So I'm joined by Tom Murdison from the council's property team and from John West from Highland today. So I mean, between us, we'll obviously endeavour to answer any questions you may have. But I say, hopefully through this report, I think we're in a good place now, despite some of the delays that clearly we've faced. So very much looking forward to getting the doors reopened as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Brian, and we appreciate the amount of work that's gone in behind the scenes. And welcome to John and Tom as well. I'll take a couple of questions, 2-3 questions or contributions from members, and then come back to yourselves. Does anyone have anything to? Struan.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Brian, for the update. And I think we're all quite cognizant that Caithness Horizon's been shut, far longer than I think anybody could have envisaged. And I think there is unlike before COVID, I think there is an understanding in the community that it will reopen at the appropriate time, which of course is the absolute right thing to do. In respect, I think this will be the first public paper where it expresses that it will be rebranded. I think that is a positive step for the North, and I think Caithness Horizons, although it was a very good idea, I think sometimes got muddled in its own branding for what it was. And I think that the new branding, I think I hope will be a positive. Although I have seen some concern from community members that we're being, I suppose, sucked into the kind of North Coast esque sort of piece that's been playing out. But from my perspective, I think a good rebrand and a strong look at the assets and what's in the building, which I know High Life Highland have been doing in the background and working away at making it a workable endeavour, I think is a huge positive. And I think from a member's perspective, we do appreciate getting the updates to committee, because I think it's the appropriate place for such an important building and an important asset to the north, that this public forum is where those updates are coming. So I'd just like to thank all concerned, and I suppose COVID dependent, hopeful to see the doors open sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Struan. I did have Carl, but your hand's gone back down.
So nothing much more to add than what Struan's comments covered. I'll wait to John's contribution if you don't mind, Nicola.
Okay, I've got Raymond and then Matthew.
Thanks. It's just on the point that Struan made there just now. I think that we need to do something to make sure that if the public have got I've seen the same information, I've seen the same posts as Struan has said there just now. It's been agreed why that name needs to change. And it's not just a new concept, it's not just a new thought that the Caithness Horizons name needed to change. It was lost in, it's okay locals knowing what Caithness Horizons is over a period of time, but that's absolutely no use to making it work if people can't identify the necessary people and the footfall that we need to attract to Caithness Horizons to make that, well, what is now the North Coast Visitor Centre, to make it work and to get money into it and to make it and to get the income streams into it. That's really important. So I think that there's a job to be done there to make sure that the public know actually really why that name has changed and what the whole marketing behind it and why it's essential, because in essence it failed, and we can't have it fail again because of the public investment that's going in there. So although it's lovely to have it would be lovely to see it as Caithness Horizons again. It would still be lovely to have the Carnegie Library in Wick as the Carnegie Library in Wick, but it's not. We have to think, pragmatically about why we're doing these things. But it's not good enough for us to know just ourselves. We need to get that message out to the public so that they do know why that's changing, and that maybe would help. Get it out there before they have the opportunity to be able to post these messages. That message is obviously not out there, but it needs to be. Thanks.
Thank you, Raymond. I'll take Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Raymond's made part of the point I was going to make, and I agree with what's been said. We need to go for it, and the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. We want it to be successful. I'm sure it will be successful. And Brian, just at a practical point, I know it's probably not specifically under your remit, but part of that success is not just the online thinking behind the change of the name, but also to make sure the signage in the town, the physical signage off the A9, is up and in place. It's never been the easiest of places to find, but it can be done, but it needs to be signposted well. And the most crucial part of that really is signage off the A9, I think, along the river, which, as an aside, is actually a very attractive part of the town as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Brian, could I ask you to pick up some of those points, please?
Yeah, thanks, and then thanks, members, for your contribution. I guess your support over the piece, because we all know it's been a long road to get to where we are now, but some positive news from what we've outlined here today. Take on board the comments have been made. I would suggest perhaps appropriate through the chair maybe to invite John West from High Life Highland perhaps just to come back on some points, particularly around the sort of rebranding and the opportunity, because it's really High Life Highland as operator or the key partner to hear from on that particular point.
Yeah, very happy to do that. John?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Yeah, interesting concept. The change of name, we always knew that there was going to be some feedback from the community, and I can largely understand where they're coming from, because they want to make sure that it still reflects the Caithness identity. So I think we're right at the start of a public engagement process. When I've spoken individually to stakeholders and explained the reasoning behind it, they absolutely get it and they accept it and they support it. But obviously, we've not got that message out to the public yet. And that, for me, is an absolutely critical step in the process. And that's the next step. That's what we need to do. They need to be absolutely reassured that it's still going to be very much their resource. It's very much a Caithness focused. It's not just the wider North Coast, a Caithness focused facility. And I think we could be in a position now that we're almost there. I keep saying this, we're almost there with the opening. But now we can start to look towards the programming as well. And I've already had discussions about the programming. And some of the initial programming is going to reflect the local community. It'll be meetings, it'll be exhibitions that once again just strengthens the whole Caithness identity. So that's very much a task for me and the team. I think we can start to get that message out there.
Thanks very much. And could I, Matthew makes a very important point actually about signage, and I do think we need to, I know it's not in the recommendations here, but I think that members need to work with the council to make sure that there's appropriate signage to help people find it. It is true, it's hard to find. I'm not sure who put their hand up first. I'll go to Carl and then Willie.
Thanks, Nicola. And John, thanks. You've already answered my questions. So it was, communication with the public in regard to branding and programming and, local community involvement. So wish you good luck on all that, and I'm sure the community will respond, be delighted to respond. So, and Brian, thanks again for your report and all your efforts. Thanks.
Thank you. Willie?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as a former director of Caithness Horizons for a good number of years, I don't think it was a failure, Caithness Horizons, by no way, because it gained a 5-star rating. The museum, one of the only 2 in the whole Highland Council area to gain a 5-star rating. But the problem is still there, and it's in 6.3, and it reads, the support and involvement of the wider community is a critical factor in determining the success and sustainability of this facility. That is still there, and I'm very worried about that. So let's hope the community will take this on board. If not, it's not looking good. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Willie. I'm not seeing any other hands up. Brian, would you like to come back in? Any final comments?
I think just to provide the assurance, obviously we'll come back and engage with ward members and through Alex in terms of updates as we move forward. Say at the moment, despite the lockdown, I mean, I guess there's some uncertainty around sort of supply chain and building works, but I mean generally things are moving forward in terms of those final sort of fit out and equipment activities that are taking place. So we're hoping that remains the case, and the lockdown doesn't impact any further in that regard. We'll keep members up to date in terms of how those works are progressing, and obviously once we're at a clearer position in terms of mapping out a timeline towards a reopening date.
Thank you. Matthew, is it a new point?
It is, Chair. 10 seconds, and apologies for already breaking my semi-informal promise not to speak twice. Just on the signage point, thanks for backing me up on that. The crucial point also is that as far as the A9 is concerned, it's not the council, it's BEAR who will be, I think, dealing with that, and it's important to get in early with BEAR so that the work gets done on time, I believe. Thank you.
Yeah, good point, Matthew. Brian?
Yeah, thanks to Councillor Rees. I was on a sideline just about to message John and colleagues almost to the same effect, which is yeah, there'll be a lead time. We know from past experience, so we'll make sure we're trying to move that forward as well.
Thank you. And just picking up on the points about public support and the rebranding and marketing of it, I think we all have a role to play in that, and we'll make sure that there's a strong press release going out, and we can all do our bit through our social media channels as well to help set the context for why that decision was made. For my part, I I support it. Nobody wants to see the Caithness identity removed, but the visitor centre is in Caithness. It's going to be showcasing a lot of Caithness, but it's only going to be a success if it has to be commercially successful. So I completely agree that picking up in a North Coast 500 will give it a better chance of attracting visitors from further afield. So totally supportive, and thank you very much for your hard work to date, and please keep us appraised.
Thank you, members.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, John. So, sorry, I should have referred back to the formal agenda. So, committee is invited to note the positive progress made regarding building and other preparatory works to support the reopening of Caithness Horizons Thurso. And number 2, ongoing support from Highland Council, High Life Highland and Doonry Site Restoration Limited on a partnership basis with the intent to reopen the facility as soon as circumstances under the current COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown allow. Are we happy to note those recommendations? Okay, so we will jump back to item 5, which is the police area performance summary, and I think we have Alistair.
Hi, good morning, members. Thank you. You'll all have sight of the report, which I'll try to keep as succinct as possible, and I would just like to highlight the following priority areas, and I'll, after I say a few words on them, I'll take any questions that are appropriate. The priorities mainly for me: road safety, road crime, acquisitive crime, and antisocial behaviour and violence. So a couple of comments just initially on that. You can see the figures. Unfortunately, there's been one fatal road collision within the area within the period from April to November. You'll be aware that was up at Freswick on A99. The circumstances which were quite widely reported. Some of the anxiety was in the community back in September. Turning to some of the specific figures in there, you can see there that there is a note against them that they are North Highland figures due to some system configurations. I've got some context more locally for you on them and would wish to comment. So in relation to drink driving, there's 12 cases we detected in that period of time. More concerningly, and I note some of the comments at previous committee meetings, drug driving, there is 18 cases on it. Now, you add the 18 to the 15, you can see it's quite a considerable return in terms of some of the concerns that you hold and that your constituents and the communities in Caithness hold. So we are proactive in that, both in terms of ourselves locally and also our road policing colleagues. The spike, I would argue, and I suggested this at one of the more formal meetings I was at recently, is around the new detection systems in terms of drug driving. And some of those have yet to go to court as well. Mobile phone usage is much lower. I would argue that there is, to a degree, that years of education and so on and so forth, and developments in technology and vehicles lead to the lower figures, much lower in this area. Arguably, although I will point out that there is new legislation coming on stream under the Road Traffic Act, so smartphone usage and all that, the other kind of usage is going to be brought into the legislation. In terms of operations and activity, one of the things we'll be looking to do going forward is around fitness to drive. It's not missed on us around, and again, it's a hard message to sell, but within the wider context about some of the more serious collisions, not specifically within this area, but broadly, there is an older driver population, and within that there's a question about the fitness to drive in terms of eyesight, agility, etc. So we'll be looking to progress to that towards in the next few weeks and months. Not saying that that is, we have done this in the past. If I move to the second point, I want to talk about acquisitive crime. I just want to stress the headline figure there under number of theft by housebreaking. It would be quite concerning. Whilst it's positive to see there's a slight reduction, what I want to just stress is that under that classification, I'm not trying to tell you that there is 16 houses being broken into and therefore you have a fear that one of the crime trends that you're experiencing in this area. It's about what we're looking at. It's whether it's an attempt was made to a house, whether it was an attempt was made to a garage or something like that. So you need to kind of understand the context a bit better for me. Shoplifting is one I want to comment on as well. For me specifically, there are 2 locations that we are suffering shoplifting. We have tried with shop managers, etc., to try and reduce this. But unfortunately, it's indicative of the times that we're in. It's indicative of some of the dependencies and needs that those involved in the activity of shoplifting are going through, and I would argue sometimes in desperation to meet addictions and dependency. Very pleasing motor vehicles. It's not a particular issue that we have. Notwithstanding, we have an individual within your forum there who has suffered at the hands of that. So I don't mean to be flippant with that, but on a more positive perspective. Turning to antisocial behaviour, violence and disorder. Licensed premises checks is always a banner headline for me that we are very proactive with. Alongside licensees in terms of checking premises, you'll see a very considerable drop. I think that goes without saying. A lot of the premises have been closed within the lockdown. What I've tried to increase is the checking of off sales around that suitability and that temperament, and I would say that's arguably successful as well. If I could turn to the reduction in terms of number of drug-related deaths, that's the headline target. You can clearly see there are 3 recorded deaths. I don't know if there's much more I can really say that I haven't briefed you all over the passage of the last few months around some of the specifics or more broader themes. And I fully acknowledge and support all the work that is being done, led by yourselves in that regard. That figure may go up once toxicology and analysis and all those things are completed. I'll turn just laterally in that section towards, you can see under the prevention intervention activity, there's a figure there of 42 in relation to fixed penalties and action taken in terms of the current COVID-19 restrictions. I have mentioned in the past, and I think it's only right to reiterate that at the beginning of the pandemic concerns, police in Caithness were very active in amongst trying to police those concerns and support the community in the area, and particularly supporting the partners in health and the local authority in terms of trying to protect our residents in Caithness, and where policing fits into that. So essentially, those were the kind of headline points that I wanted to just touch on and bring to your attention. As I say, trying to keep it as succinct as I can. I see you've got quite a significant business agenda today, but I'm welcome to take any questions from you.
Thanks very much, Alistair. I don't have any hands up at present. Okay, I've got Raymond and then Matthew.
I don't actually have any questions, Alistair, but the reason I put my hand up, if nobody else had their hand up at that point, was firstly to appreciate all the updates that you've been given all the officers and the members at council. We know that the forum that the public have where you're reporting to us is formalised, and that's what the public will see in the agenda today. But there are lots of other meetings that go and discussions, and you've made yourself available, and your officers are available for us to be able to tackle all the individual issues that are coming our way, and quite a number of them as a result of lockdown. So I think we should be according our thanks to you. And we've known that it's been a tough time for Police Scotland and the local area. I also wanted to, on record that even though sometimes there's a consideration that the profile of Police Scotland is not maybe is taking a bit of a hit in the local area. We know the work that's going on behind the scenes. It's tough, and it's not just tough. It's very tough. We've got lots of issues out in our community that we are very much trying to tackle, and it's only by working together that we're managing to do that. You've been attending a whole load of other meetings with the community, the Association of Caithness Community Councils last year, and I know that there's another meeting coming up that you've said that you're happy to receive the invite for, and also all the other multi-agency forums that you have to attend and your officers have to attend, dealing with specific actual issues within the area, whether it's looked after children, whether it's adult services, whether it's vulnerable certain vulnerable groups in the area. So I just want it on record that we're supportive of Police Scotland here, and that we're also very supportive of the individual actions that they have to do in looking after the community. I know as well that just the visual presence of Police Scotland, I've seen a difference in that because of the lockdown and looking for the compliance. We can all take, we can be circumspect, we can be suspicious, but the police are there to give reassurance. And I think that it's important that the public know that that's the case. There is a reassurance because of the fact that Police Scotland are there for the needs of the public when it's required. So hats off to you, Alistair. I know it's a tough time for you and the officers, but working together will make it a safer community for all.
Thanks, Raymond, and very well said. Matthew.
Yes, once again, I find myself agreeing. I think 100% with what Councillor Bremner has just said. It doesn't always happen, but absolutely spot on. And I suppose, Alistair, maybe one little phrase that Raymond used there was the sort of unseen work going on behind the scenes that never really gets into the public eye, when police officers are more like, frankly, friends to people, trying to do a bit of mental health help, that kind of thing. It doesn't get reported, but it's there. And I just really wanted to add, my support to your colleagues. And I also wanted to add my support, the drug driving figures there. It could be the case that some people in a rather lazy fashion might sort of somehow say this is all the fault of the police, that there's an increase in detections. I would take exactly the opposite approach and say, well done for getting the detections. And the reason that it's well done is simply if anybody has an accident driving under the influence of drink or drugs, the consequences can be life-changing, or even on occasion, there is no life. So that's the reason the enforcement takes place. And I'm sure you've got all 100% support to keep going. It may be a long haul to educate people about the perils of drug driving. We've been at the drink driving for 30 odd years, maybe it's 40 now, but eventually messages do get through. It can take a long time, but thank you to your colleagues and yourself for all that you're doing.
Thanks, Matthew. Willie now, and then Carl.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Alistair, good to see you again. Yeah, Matthew, the message about don't drink and drive, I'm not too sure if it's getting through at all. I always pick this up on your fantastic reports, Alistair, and it's even worse this time. The recent figures in the last 2 weeks, with the less amount of vehicles on the road, there's been an increase of drink, and not only drink, but drug-related driving as well. It's really, really a big, big worry here. So I'm not too sure how we're going to ever improve on that. But however, Alistair, on vehicle theft, which I was involved in myself, I'd like to thank the police for the involvement they did in recovering my vehicle. But I was astonished, really, at the amount of paperwork your officers have got to go through to record everything that happened along the way. And that is really time-consuming for the officers. So I just wonder, was there any way around that these days to cut down the paperwork? Because for me alone, it was 2.5 hours giving a statement, and that's a lot of time out of an officer's day. But however, thanks, Alistair, for everything anyway. It's really been good to see you again.
Thank you, Willie. I'll come to Carl and then back to Alistair to respond to some of those points. Carl?
Thank you, Nicola, and Alistair, thank you very much for your report. And absolutely on board with Raymond's comments. Just a couple of things, particularly on the point about drug driving. I wonder, is there an opportunity for national advertising campaigns on the topic? My own best example I got was at, I think it was last year's Safe Highland event, where they'd arranged for kids a demonstration of debilitating effects of drugs. So essentially, put a mask on your face and you had to walk towards a board and write your name and whatnot. And it was, that actually done a video to demonstrate just what the effects were. And I thought it was a really good example. But I guess, as always, we're in danger of just focusing on problems, locally when we should be doing it nationally. I don't know how that works. Government level. Just interested to get your response. One of the really interesting things for me when we speak about pilot projects we've got in Caithness, as a result of that, one of your colleagues, Carl's got in touch, just to explore what we're doing. So, it's fantastic the links are being broadened out across the Highlands and how we can, share best practice and whatnot. So that's me, Arthur. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alistair, would you like to respond to some of those?
Yeah, Chair, please, if I can. Thank you. Can I firstly, on the comments from Councillor Glimmer, can I pass my thanks for that? You can see I'm kind of almost lost for words because it's not often that we get appreciation, but within this forum, I've worked tirelessly to ensure that you're kept up to date with what's going on, and I'm now feeling that I'm seeing the rewards of the efforts, and I will make sure that that is passed on to all my colleagues downstairs in Thurso and across the wider teams within Caithness, specifically from yourselves, the appreciation. It's disappointing, I suppose, in the report that in terms of where its timeline is, because in December we obviously had Operation Ruling, which we were all fully briefed on, and some of the successes of that are not captured in here. But in time we'll get through that. In response to Councillor Rees, I deliberately put out the drink and drug driving from a local context, so that you can see that. And yes, building on that point about the association of community councils and so on and so forth, that will be a theme we will be pushing this year to constituents and to local community councillors about our efforts to tackle this clear priority. In response to Councillor Mackay, yeah, again, I wasn't trying to specifically highlight your own unfortunate set of circumstances. If I found the officers had not spent any less time, and I'm conscious I'm being recorded here, they would have got it, because it's important that we deal with these things properly. I feel that, yes, administratively wise, there is an awful lot, but going forward with the mobile devices, and I would like to stress kind of the agility of the officers now and their skills. What might appear time consuming, actually they're very, very good at it, and committing that time from the very start often pays dividends. And so from that perspective, and Councillor Rosie, I think your point is extremely valid. For me, if you look across the profile of those who are prepared to get behind the wheel of a car, or any vehicle for that matter, having taken controlled substance or for that matter prescribed substances, which I'll remind you all affects us too, then there is certainly, it appears for me in the community, very much a culture within the younger generation, and also within the kind of mid-range 30 to 40s, and it would always appear to be either something that's happened at the weekend and they're getting caught at the beginning of the week, or it's interesting within the pandemic climate that we're in, that there has also been, I would argue, an increase in, to support Councillor Mackay's observations, a willingness or an actual part on drivers to take that risk I think I'd bring this to a close. I would just stress the points that Councillor Rees made, that, and this is the message to constituents and to everybody in the community in Caithness, if you take that risk, the consequences could be fatal, life-changing for not only that individual who drove the car, or the person within the vehicle, or the other vehicle, or the pedestrian, but for the families of those victims as well. And that's the message I'd like to get across. So, so once again, thank you all for your support, and I look forward, if I'm indulged to say this, just in terms of the Pathfinder project, and where you go with this afternoon. If I can, maybe I'll conscious of I'm going off slightly off topic, but I'll just get in contact with you just to find out where things are with it, to keep me up to date. So thank you all.
Yeah, happy to do that, Alistair, and definitely would like to have your continued involvement in the project, and it's important that we keep communicating going forward. So happy to have that discussion with you offline. Willie, did you want to come back in?
Just a quick one comment. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, of the 51 that was caught over the festive season, it's interesting to note of the risk takers, 25 of them were caught the following morning. But even more is the fact that the majority of them were reported by friends and relations, which is good because they don't want these people on the road. So that's a fair point. Thanks, Chair.
Any other comments or questions, members? Donny.
Thanks, Chair. Alistair, a question I'd like to ask you is, are they more antisocial since this virus? They can't get to the pubs or clubs or since its last lockdown. Could you tell me if is it rising or is it going down? Thanks, Alistair.
Yeah, I think to give you some context, I'm seeing particular spikes in certain areas, more around the sort of house party perspective. So there are people out there that are quite willing to ignore the restrictions, ignore the spirit of the guidance, and particularly the messages that come out with the community. They're completely indifferent towards it. So in the fact that we have arrested individuals and we have issued fixed penalties under the new laws, of note, I am aware of one individual that has had somewhere in the region of 4 fixed penalties. Now that is an indication that folk are prepared to flout it. I would like to reassure you, Councillor, that I'm probably not seeing the scale of it, but what I am seeing it is in particular spots. So Thurso, interestingly, in certain areas have seen a particular issue within a small residential area, and I think that context gives you some idea of why it's happening there. But within our powers that we're available to us and what we can do, I can assure you we've been taking action.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thanks, Alistair. And Matthew and Raymond have already said very eloquently how much we all appreciate the hard work that's been going in recently. Particularly, I think this is the first formal meeting of Caithness Committee since Operation Ruling, and I'm glad you mentioned it. It was obviously very, very successful, and we were delighted to support it and hope to be able to do more partnership working like that in future. And also appreciate yourself always taking the time, and Conrad attending our last special meeting as well. So it's much appreciated, and let's keep up the good work. Members were invited to note progress made against the objectives set within the Highlands and Islands Local Policing Plan 2020 to 2023, Year 1, attached as Annex A to this report for the period covering April 2020 to 30th November 2020. Do you note the contents of the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks, Alistair.
If it's in order, can I just listen in to some of the other, unless I have to go, is that in order with you? Of
course you can, yeah, yep. You're very welcome to stay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to, sorry, yes, Alex.
Could you switch off your camera then, Alistair, please? Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to item 6, the WIC ESG, please. And is it, I'm not sure who's presenting, is it Nicky Grant we have today?
There's Nikki and there's me and there's Seb from Wick High School.
Spoilt for choice.
Yeah.
Who's it?
Will I go first, Nikki, or do you want?
No, if you take the stage, Alison, then we'll ask Seb to maybe come in, and then I'm happy to give a further update, if that's okay, members.
Okay,
so it's good to have you all here. Thank you. Go ahead, Alison.
Sorry, I'll just get my notes up. Yeah, good morning, members. You've received the usual data within the committee report, which I'm happy to answer any questions to. But for today, I thought because our current situation is so different, I would share a picture of what the remote learning and childcare is in the Wick area. It's very similar to the Thurso area as well. So I would give an overview of that, and then Seb, head teacher at Wick High, he's going to give you a picture of what's happening in his school. And we've also, as you said, we've got Nikki here, Eco for Education and Learning as well. So attending school, you'll have heard the update from the First Minister a couple of days ago, and she stated that all Scottish schools have been closed to most pupils, and that will remain the case until at least mid-February. In the Wick ASG, we have around 8% of children and young people in school. Schools are providing childcare for these pupils using a skeleton staff made up of mainly PSAs and pupil support assistants and early years practitioners. And there's a senior member of staff overseeing that as well. In the Wick ASG, we've got a roll of around about 1,770. And the split is fairly even. We've got 54 key worker pupils in schools just now, and we've got 65 vulnerable children, sometimes full-time, sometimes part-time, or some full-time, some part-time. Teaching staff and any other staff not required for childcare, they are working from home. Teachers planning and delivering teaching and learning, PSAs supporting individual children, and also PSAs and early years practitioners are able to access professional development activities. Lunch and transport arrangements continue as required. And for those who are at home, there's direct payments or supermarket vouchers provided to families who are eligible for free school meals when accessing their online learning. In the Wick ASG, there is no need for childcare in 3 of our schools, Dunbeath, Bower and Canisby. They have no key workers or vulnerable, but if that comes about, then they are able to open at any time. In relation to key worker children and young people, schools have offered childcare during school hours for children aged 3 and 14, for key workers who are working away from their home and have no other childcare provision. The advice from the Scottish Government is that the safest place to be in the current situation is at home, and if possible, key worker families should make arrangements to provide their own childcare rather than using the school. This can be difficult. It's difficult for teachers as well as everybody else, balancing childcare and work at home, you know, when you have to spend time with your children, and also, for instance, a teacher trying to find time to prepare and present and assess learning. So it needs to be carefully balanced, and expectations need to be reasonable. Some children and young people rely upon the care and protection provided by school, and those identified as the most vulnerable are prioritised for in-school support. Head teachers have used their own local knowledge and that of partners to help identify children and young people. And as lockdown and remote learning continues, school staff are monitoring engagement with these children, with all children, and the health and well-being of the children and young people. And it may be that places are offered to families of people who maybe aren't coping as well. Remote learning, this is our second time round. Clear guidance on remote learning has been shared with all our head teachers in Highland. It's been based on Scottish Government guidance, and it's been highlighted by Education Scotland as good practice. Parents and carers have also been sent remote learning guidance, and we have weekly area head teacher meetings to share new guidance and discuss any challenges. We also are setting up smaller school groups within our area to take a closer look at remote learning and share that good practice. As mentioned before, expectations on the amount of learning and how it is presented must be reasonable and manageable for pupils, parents and school staff. Staff are settling back into the remote learning, putting into practice lessons learned from the first lockdown and following the guidance mentioned above. Support is given to those who struggle with devices or connectivity. In conversations with the WIC head teachers, some schools have a device per pupil, others are making sure there is at least one per family, 2, for instance, if there's 3 children in the home. There's a clear expectation that the curriculum is to build on the recovery work that has been done in schools and should include a focus on promoting and developing skills that will support independent learning. Health and well-being, of course, remains a key priority. It is expected that learning at home activities will include opportunities to consolidate learning and extend and enhance learning, taking account of and meeting the needs of learners and their families. This may be delivered in a variety of ways, for example, through pre-recorded lessons, practical open-ended activities, problem solving, presentations, lesson notes, diagrams, etc., etc. I spoke to all the head teachers in the WIC ASG over the last couple of days, and there's a real positive feel. There's a much calmer feel this time around. You know, you've done it once, we're learning from what happened the last time, and we're continuing to learn as well. Some of the comments I just quickly noted down. All of the WIC head teachers said engagement is high. Registration on Google Classroom Seesaw is completed by children by 9:30, 10 o'clock. Teachers' IT confidence. Those who are confident are supporting those who are not. We're moving forward with learning, they were saying. For example, each reading group has a separate live time with their teacher. Example timetables are put up to help pupils and parents organise their week. Live meets are organised with groups of pupils for maybe 40, 45 minutes. PSAs are doing one-to-one sessions with pupils online. Parent contact, one of the head teacher in Keith and Bauer, he was telling me that they have online quizzes so that try and communicate with whole families maybe once a week or a fortnight. And they had 28, 2 small schools, they had 28 families who took part in their superhero quiz, I think it was last week. So in conclusion, we're still learning, building confidence and sharing what quality remote learning looks like, but all schools have reflected on the remote learning last year and made changes to improve. Staff, I would say, are fairly calm and feeling more confident. Engagement at the moment is good, and those who are not engaging have regular communication and support from staff in our schools. And I'd ask Seb to give a picture of what it particularly looks like in WIC High.
Hello, should I go now, or you've got questions to Alison first?
No, if we'll take yourself and Nikki, and then we'll come to members. Thanks very much, Seb. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'll give you a perspective what it looks like in WIC High School at this time, and it's very similar in many cases to what Alison already mentioned. As you've seen in the report, we've got over 700 pupils in our school roll. It's 708 currently. I think the report states about 712. And at this moment, we've got the school open to the vulnerable pupils and the key workers' children. And we have contacted 118 families to invite their children as a vulnerable pupils. And we've got at the moment 37 pupils on average attending school, which of those 37, we've got 14 pupils of key workers' children and 23 vulnerable. And they attend school on most days of the week. The key workers' children attend on the part-time when their parents are at work. We've got them organized in the year groups, bubbles to keep within the COVID risk assessment and procedures, and we've got a skeleton of staff in school to support them, mainly in classes by PSAs. We've got a receptionist, clerical, member of SMT, and we've got a youth work team, CSW counselors, and they come in when they need to work with the vulnerable children and when they're needed. And pupils who attend school, they follow the same online model that we have created for the pupils who are staying at home. And the online model that we have created was based on the experience that we've had in the previous lockdown. We've looked into the feedback from pupils, parents and staff, and we've based the model that we've got currently on that. The model, to describe, briefly describe the model that we follow just now, and it's adapted period structure of a school day, and pupils go there. It's based on the timetable that we've had when we had open school. We've got still 7 periods, however the period's been reduced to 30 minutes to reduce the screen time for pupils, and between each period they've got 15 minutes break, and in the middle of the day they've got the lunch break as well. Within the timetable, the pupils would be logging into the Google Classrooms, and they will be engaging in their lessons as they would. There'll be interactions with their teachers when they'll have opportunities to ask questions, look for guidelines, look for instructions. Teachers will be present within the time with their pupils.
Hi, Helen. Hi, Helen. Neil Young here.
Hello.
Neil, could you please mute your microphone? Sorry, Seb, please continue.
Sorry, that's all right. As Alison said as well, it's similar with us. The lessons are blended for teachers providing guidance, skills-based activities, knowledge and understanding activities, research and reading that will be preparing pupils for the future assignments. When it comes to the attendance and engagement, throughout the first week of the lockdown, we were able to measure attendance on a period-by-period basis using our CMS system, and it highlighted that it was very high, with only a minority of pupils not registering for any periods during the school day. And within the first week, we had less than 20 pupils that we needed to contact that they didn't register. But please note that attendance and engagement are 2 separate things, and although attendance is easier for us to measure, it's not as simple to quantify and monitor engagement, as it works mostly on a weekly cycles. However, saying that, after the first week of the lockdown, we've had approximately 80 pupils, 80% of the pupils engaging in completing tasks set by their teachers. And with that, I'm not saying all the tasks, but engaging in their education. With that, of course, the first priority for us at this time is the health and well-being of our pupils and their families and staff. And as mentioned before, we've got a skeleton of staff who are in regular contact with the rest of the pupils that we have identified as vulnerable and who are not attending school at the time. And there'll be their guidance staff, learning support staff, CSW, WIC, youth work team, counselors and other professionals. And there will be in regular contacts. They've got additional classrooms organized. For example, they've got a mental health classes. They run a live sessions with those pupils. And sometimes it's just a simple telephone conversation to find out how they're coping within the situation. Another important issue, moving on, is SQA qualifications. They are a very important aspect for many of our students and their families, of course, as it impacts on the future and their plans for the future. And I need to say that at this stage, we had no communication from SQAs in 2021 regarding the current situation and what and how it will impact on the plans that we had presented for us before. So if not for the lockdown, we would be in the middle of the first assessment window, and that would be followed by the second assessment window in early April, and that would be working towards the 28th of May, which was set as a closing date for submission of the provisional results for national courses. And the previous instruction from SQE was that we cannot collect evidence during remote learning, as it's not possible. And there's the multiple reasons to that, a few of them being security. And although we could set our Chromebooks, the Chromebooks that our pupils are using, as in a secure mode, meaning that they could not access anything via internet, but we cannot prevent them from looking at notes. As you can see, we cannot stop them working with each other, somebody helping them. Basically what I'm saying, we cannot simply replicate the exam conditions to collect the evidence. And the other important issue with that would be that there are pupils who are entitled additional support needs, which we would not be able to provide at home when they're working remotely, which would raise questions about the equity for all, and then with present problems later on during the quality assurance procedures. So at the moment, we have to continue with the essential coursework with all the learners so that the course context for the required national qualification is covered. And we are waiting for further communication from SQA as how to proceed with the plans. When we will return, and hopefully that'll be sooner than later, when we will return to school, we will focus on the recovery, assessing the new attainment gap, analyzing the data that we've collected throughout the time. We'll identify pupils who will be mostly affected by the lockdown, and then we'll develop strategies how we can best support them. And when it comes to the senior pupils and the SQA that I've mentioned, we will be looking to collect evidence for the provisional grades. That's pretty much, I would say, how the online learning looks at the moment in Wick High School.
Thanks very much for that, Seb. That was really detailed and really helpful, and obviously there's a huge amount of work going on. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Nikki, did you want to add any closing comments before we go to members?
I think I'm quite happy with that, Councillor Sinclair, in terms of the the update that you've been given around remote learning. Just to give you a couple of figures nationally in terms of what's happening in key worker and sort of vulnerable hubs just now. So nationally, the figure is sitting at 7% across all school roles. The Northern Alliance figure is currently sitting at 9%, and as an authority, we're sitting at 8.65%. So I suppose from from my point of view, I think we are adhering to the guidelines. We're trying to keep remote learning going, but at the same time, we're trying to provide provision for our key worker and our most vulnerable young people. I was at a national meeting this morning, and I know that the Scottish Government put out some guidelines on Tuesday. So the conversation today was around potentially maybe having some of our young people return after the February break, and we'll be looking at key transition stages. So some of our youngest young people who are currently working at level 1, some of our primary 7 young people, and our secondary young people who would be traditionally sitting exams. So that was a conversation this morning that I had with some of the directors of education. The other key conversation that we had, and some information is going to go out to head teachers today, is around the possibility of mass testing for our staff in schools. So details will go out today to our head teachers, and that will be returned to the Scottish Government in terms of how that will be rolled out for our staff. I suppose the only other thing that I was going to maybe add to your feedback, Alison and Seb, which is around Education Scotland engagement. So, in terms of the quality assurance of our remote learning, although our officers are supporting our head teachers, HMI are also keen to engage with some of our schools. And Councillor Sinclair, just based on a conversation that I had with yourself and your own children, around their school, and you had said to me last week that remote learning was going particularly well. So Mount Pleasant and Castleton Primary School are now part of that HMI process. The conversation is around, good practice. The conversations around, potentially how parents are getting on at home with the remote learning, and then maybe some things that we could do better. So we'll look forward to those conversations, and we'll take note of that, report to the Education Committee around that. The other thing, members, that I maybe just wanted to give you an update on today, because I know that I've had a couple of conversations, was just around the ESN. We're still in conversation around what that potentially could look like. We are looking for a stage intervention approach to support our most vulnerable young people, our ASL young people and our staff in schools. So within the stage intervention approach, what we're looking to do over the next couple of months is to work with our staff regarding training for CMIS and recording the levels of our young people, so whether it's level 1, 2, 3 and 4. So there's much more of an open and transparent process, but I suppose more of a quality assurance process around that. On a regular basis, we're also going to have multi-agency meetings, and again, just based on the feedback that we've had from some of our vulnerable hubs in the summer, and also the way that we're working with our vulnerable young people on a daily basis, these meetings will allow us to, look at the levels, reconsider levels, and where appropriate, put up and down. And obviously, we've also got the vastness of the Highlands and the potential of maybe some young people moving into an area or moving out to an area. So those meetings will be regular. Within the stage intervention process too, We're going to be looking at the child planning and the moderation of the child planning, A, to make it less bureaucratic, but B, as well, to speed up that process, and again to have more of a consistent approach to how we do that. We're also considering, just based on the ESL review, an assessment framework to ensure that we are measuring the progress of our most vulnerable and our ESL young people, and again more information will come out on this. We're going to be providing monthly networking sessions for our colleagues and our colleagues within the Highlands, but also we're going to get out with our practice to ensure that the best practice comes to the Highland Council to support our most vulnerable and our ESL young people. We'll review the distribution of the resource on a regular basis, and it'll be my responsibility as the Executive Chief Officer to review the distribution, and again just to ensure transparency across our areas. And finally, members, what we're also going to look to do, and it's part of the ESL planning process, is to review the PSA role and remit and just ensure that there is a clear pathway for all of our PSAs where appropriate across the Highland Council. So that was just to give you more of an update, and I'm happy in the future maybe to talk about the Pathway Finder project too, although I know that members are part of that this afternoon in terms of the project plan. Happy to take questions, members.
Thanks very much to all three of you for that, and I should have declared an interest because I have a primary school child and a nursery child at Newton Park Primary, and if I could very, very briefly add a personal perspective, my own experience as a parent homeschooling at the moment entirely reflects the picture that you've painted today. Alison, you mentioned about timetabling and Google Meets, and definitely second time around, it went very well first time around, but second time around I'm really impressed by how well organised all the teachers are. Worksheets being given out safely, example timetables and Google Meets so that they can have time with their friends as well, which is really important to their mental well-being too. So yeah, as a parent, I just wanted to say well done. It's really impressive, and I know at Newton Park the attendance levels for homeschooling are at about 95%, which is really very, very high when you consider the circumstances. So thank you very much for that. I have Raymond and Matthew with questions. Alex, you're waving furiously. I'll take you first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have been sending you messages. You've obviously not been getting them.
Sorry.
We'll need to have this recorded as a separate issue altogether because the actual report that the members are asked to scrutinise is about KSG. So we need to get this recorded as being a verbal report on schooling in the county during the COVID lockdown, something along that line. We don't want to lose the fact that the report has been tabled as for the WIC KSG group. So members will still need to note to scrutinise on contents of that report, please. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thanks for clarifying that, Alex. I've forgotten who came in first. I'll go Raymond and then Matthew.
Yeah, points well made, Alex. I think that members are on that. And if the officers hadn't been giving us a verbal update on the actual current situation in Caithness, we would have been asking for it. So I'll thank the officers for their anticipation of that, because I think like the chair, what you're saying there just now is reflecting a lot of the things that we're being made aware of, and it also gives us the forward vision. If in general, maybe Nikki, you could let us know what the potential is in terms of looking at the exiting of lockdown further down the road, and the impacts that that's going to have, maybe Alison, on the attainment and the measurement of the attainment going forward, so that it's not just this report we're looking at, but we're anticipating what level of information we're going to be able to realistically have reported, because the circumstances are completely different. That would be good, but that's not one of my questions. That's well, it is one of my questions. Sorry, it is, yeah, but not one of the ones I had intended in asking. First of all, yes, the report is about the WIC ASG, and you know how many times we come to the table here and we are again presented with a set of figures that makes us very proud of the attainment and makes us very proud of the education delivery in our own area. That wasn't the case when we were looking at this in 2017-18, when we were, some of us were first elected. We were presented with comparison figures that were not good. and not only have they been that has been turned over and improved drastically, it has been maintained, and that was going to be the test that what we were doing was sustainable. So hats off to all the kids and all the students for their hard work, and for the teachers as well, because yet again, in the positive destinations, which is always in my mind a measure of how we've managed to set our young people up for life. Once they leave the school, your teachers are less in control and direct controls. Yes, your influences are still there on those children as they go forward, but the determination of how they're going to get on in life is to me exemplified in what we see in the figures. We know that there are swings and roundabouts in Caithness, where many go on to further education or instead of higher education, or higher education instead of further education, and also on to further employment rather than education itself. So the only one issue that I would have, or just let's say it's a concern, or maybe something for an explanation, is why the figure has shot up to unknown destinations to 5%. It's never been anything like that. So is that something to do with what we're having to the current circumstances that we're having to live in? But 5% is an awful lot in my book to not know where the destination of some of those students are. So if somebody could answer that question for me, please, that would be great. Also, on page 32, if somebody could actually let me know what are we using to determine the levels of ASN and PSA? I know that we have the matrix, but what has allowed us to determine the extra resource in there? And is that extra resource going to be sustainable? Should we be considering that is something that we should be welcoming, and we can see that sustainable? Another question I have is the technology that we've invested in to support the remote learning of our students, because this is not normal circumstances for them. They normally have all the technology and all the materials at their hand at school. An awful lot of them don't have that. We've heard the percentages of how many are accessing for various different reasons. The bulk of them are not. And in particular, with a particular focus on the Chromebooks for all levels of primary. I know that, I'd like clarification. Is it the case that all pupils have access to Chromebooks, or is it different? Does it vary across the schools? For instance, in rural schools, is it the case that Chromebooks are available from primary 1 to primary 7 because the entire school has the benefit of accessing that, whereas in the larger primary schools, Chromebooks may be only available from a certain primary age upwards? Can I get clarification on that? And what are we doing to see if we can support the active learning at home through the Chromebooks and making them available to lower primaries, if that's indeed appropriate? I would suggest that maybe that is something that we should be looking at if it's already in some of the rural schools. And I think that's all, is it? I'm just reviewing my questions here. Yeah, I think that's. But hats off to the excellent work of the pupils and the teachers, and being able to provide those figures and keep them sustainable in terms of the Wick High School positive destinations. And just to let members know, I've already flagged up the message, the questions to Nikki Grant, so she's already prepared. On you go, Nikki and Alison.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Nicola.
That's okay. Raymond had handed over to you anyway, Nikki. No, I was just going to say before we come into Matthew and Stu, and there is quite a lot of questions in there, so I'll let you pick those up. I think it was positive destinations, ASN, and Chromebooks. So I'll leave that with you.
Thank you. What I'll maybe do is I'll maybe invite Seb just to give an update on his positive destinations, and then I'm quite happy to pick up the 5% positive destinations and then put it into sort of national context. And Alison, if you don't mind, I'll just pick up the rest of the conversation in terms of the IT learning. And I'm happy for you to kind of dip in terms of the young people, and how we support our young people with active learning, if that's okay. So Seb, I'll hand over to you in terms of your positive destinations, because you know your school inside out. and then what I'll do is I'll give it from a national perspective.
Look, I would say, first of all, when it comes to the 5.5, I'm looking at the report, I'm seeing that for 16-17 year rather than the recent 1.44. So it came down. So I don't know, could you maybe explain why you think 5% unknown? Because that's not what I'm looking at the report at the moment.
Can I come in there? The report, Seb, is 2019-20. It's a year behind.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
So that answers the question then. Seb's just given me the answer then. If he knows what the current status is, that it falls, but maybe we could get an explanation as to why it was at 5%.
So what I would say that what we started looking closer to get the answer from the pupils when they were leaving our schools, we're tightening up those procedures for pupils to let us know where they're going, and that allowed us to classify them into the groups where they were going. So that really answers the question. So that I wouldn't say that a lot of that changed in the years in the perspective where pupils were heading to, but we've managed to monitor that better.
Okay, and I suppose from my perspective, in terms of 5%, that is a significant amount of young people, Seb, within your school and your current school role. So things that we could potentially maybe do better, using our Chromebooks a bit better. I know that SDS and DYW are looking to maybe have some advertisement opportunities through our Chromebooks, and just making sure that some of our 4th year young people, our 5th year young people, and our 6th year young people, that they're aware of, the positive destinations that they can go on to. I think we need to probably work a little bit closer with Careers Development Scotland as well, and just make sure we have these conversations. And Seb, I know that I've visited Wick on a number of occasions, and one of the great things that you do is that you have a tracker for each of your young people, and to ensure that they are going to go into a positive destination, so whether that's college or university or a workplace. As you'll be aware, Councillor Bremner too, part of the Pathway project and part of my commitment as eco to Caithness, what we're looking to do is to introduce a skills academy. I had some conversations around about that yesterday, just to make sure that some of those young people, particularly at the end of 4th year that are vulnerable, 5th year that are vulnerable, and 6th year that are vulnerable, that we're making sure that they go into a positive destination. In terms of unknown, what I would say to you is the data is always picked up in the summer, and then they then come back to the data in February. So I suppose, Seb, what we'd need to do is to take your current data, because I know that Insight's been updated, and you could potentially give that data to Councillor Bremner, just to see where we are with that figure. But you're right, Councillor Bremner, that's the first thing that HMI would ask to do is, where is that 5%? Why are they not in a positive destination? What are you doing? So it's not just about the end of education, it's about when they come, all the way up to 25. So, but Seb, you can maybe update Councillor Bremner on that, with your current figures.
I will do, yes.
Okay. I'm going to just go on to the question around ESN and the levels. So within the Wick area just now, you've got a roll of 1,769 young people. 94 young people are currently sitting at level 3, which is approximately 5.3%, and 32 young people are currently sitting at level 5, which is 1.8%. And you correctly pointed out that what we do is we use the matrix of need, which has been revamped twice. I think what we need to do in terms of our ASL review is to relook at the matrix of need and get some feedback on it. We're also going out to a number of local authorities to compare what we do to other local authorities and really make sure that we're getting it right for all of our young people. We're planning to look at the data on a more regular basis, because what I would say to you is the data is only looked at twice in the year, and it also relies on staff updating CMIS on it. So again, that is part of our plan. What we need to do is we need to make sure that all of our staff are appropriately trained in the CMIS training and that they are recording the correct levels. And then secondly, it's about us quality assuring those levels and having better conversations with our head teachers and our staff around that level of need. So that's currently where we're at just now in terms of the levels of ESN. I think, Alison, you're just about to do a data cleansing, aren't you, in the next couple of weeks around ASL? So head teachers have been asked to update that, and also ELC, young people that are coming into primary 1, you've just put out some information around that too. So over the next sort of couple of weeks, we will have more data around our level 3 and level 4. The question around digital learning. So right now we've got over 4,000 devices that have just gone out since April, and that was based on the grant that we were given from the Scottish Government. All of our young people from primary 6 to S6 have a one-to-one device. And since April 2020, 183 families have been supported through our Connecting Scotland and My Wi-Fi devices. We've currently got another 200 still available. All young people in schools under 72 and within the role have a one-to-one device. And there are additional devices for all young people between primary 1 and primary 5. However, we made the decision that that would go to the most vulnerable young people. And I suppose active learning, Alison, would you like to come in around active learning, how we're supporting our primary 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s, please, through active learning?
Yes, I would agree, Raymond, that we do have in the remote areas, we're taking Wick in particular here, we've got a number of small schools where all children have devices. And yet in the larger schools they don't. However, they've made sure that there's at least one device that's available. Also, teachers are very keen to have a varied programme for the children over the week with activity, health and well-being, moving forward with their learning, and they produce that in many different ways. Sometimes it's through packs, as Nicholas suggested earlier on. Other times for the younger children, they use Seesaw and they're able to communicate with parents through Seesaw and the children through the Seesaw platform. So that's what they're. I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly here. Am I not? Do you want to ask me again exactly what it was you were? Sorry.
That's exactly what was going through my head. You're not answering the question, Alison. No. The fact that maybe in some of the smaller schools where the Chromebooks are actually accessible, they're at home with the kids.
Yeah.
Yes. So they have that as a learning support at home, whereas there is a frustration, and I'm glad that you've said. I wanted clarification. Is that the case? And you've said it is. So I'm actually going to change my question now. Sorry, Chair, I'm changing my question. What are we going to do to be able to? She's nodding her head. I'll get on with it. But what are we going to do to be able to support? I know Seb's got me there already. Sorry, Seb. What are we going to do to be able to support? I mean, it's different times, but there can be frustration at home if certain kids who don't have the accessibility to the Chromebooks because they're not accessing school, they don't have that learning support at home or that key facility to be able to supplement their education. Is there something that we need to do to be able to try and support that at this period in time? Is there? That's, I suppose, is my question now, because you've given me the opportunity. Sorry, there we go.
No, that's fine. I suppose, so in terms of the one-to-one devices for the schools under 72, that takes into account 105 schools, which it leaves about 63 schools that don't have that one-to-one device. So I suppose, Councillor Brenner, what you're saying is, for those young people, there are devices, but it's for our most vulnerable young people. So how are we ensuring that we're continuing learning? So I suppose what we're trying to say is that we're relying on the classroom teacher to have a conversation, to have that check-in twice a week, and we're relying on, I suppose, a family to have a device to support that check-in. Secondly, what we do is there are actual activity packs that have gone home to the young people. So you're relying on the parent to support through probably paper packs rather than that remote learning. So there are 73 schools that have no one-to-one device for primary 1 to primary 5, and the remainder of the schools, which is 105, have a one-to-one device for our primary 1 to primary 5.
Yeah, if I can come in there, that's what I was trying to say earlier on, not very eloquently, but it's also the case you don't want people online all the time. You don't want the kids, it wouldn't be good for them. So what we have is it's making use of the head teachers and the staff in the schools know their families. They speak to them. They're aware of those who have other devices. Sometimes it might be a phone, actually, especially for the younger ones. With the younger ones, they don't want them to be doing huge, for the sake of it, written tasks online. What they want to be doing is suggesting activities that they might do on their own or with parents. So it's not that people aren't being communicated and aren't being set tasks. They are. And it's because these teachers know their children, know their families, and having that communication. If there's somebody who's really struggling, then they're on the phone to them. They're checking their connectivity. They're getting them Wi-Fi. They're trying to find Google Chromebooks from the school, perhaps. There's a spare one, and they choose, as Nikki says, to give it to the vulnerable child. So it's not that they're not having learning. They are having learning. They are having communication from the teacher. It's just they don't have they're not on the Google Chrome all the time.
Yeah, and you're relying on families. You are relying on families to have devices within those 72 schools, and it's the most vulnerable families that have a device.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I think we've had a good detailed discussion on that, and if there's anything else, we can pick it up offline. I'll go to Matthew and then Struan now.
Yeah, I'm starting to get concerned. Third time in a row, Raymond has said a lot of what I was going to say. Listening to the conversation about Chrome, oh yes, Chair, I was meaning to say you might need to get your egg timer out at some point, but not for me, I hasten to add. Yes, Raymond. What I was going to say was on the conversation of the Chromebooks, I suspect behind all of this, the ideal would be obviously one device for every child. Ultimately, let's not beat about the bush. I suppose this comes down to money at the very end of the day. I mean, it's been a fantastic effort. The Scottish Government money is welcome. And if it could go a bit further, even better. That's just a side point. My main point actually was aimed, Nikki, at yourself. You touched on a word that's dear to my heart, bureaucracy, and then I was very pleased to hear you say you were trying to reduce it. And being extremely brief and to the point, it's one of my absolute pet things, not just in education, but in all areas of the council. Bureaucracy takes up time, and time is money when officers could be doing something probably more productive. And also, particularly just now, bureaucracy can cause stress, and we need to be doing everything we can to reduce it. I didn't quite pick up exactly the gist of what you said, Nikki, about how something might reduce bureaucracy, and if you could literally give me or give us a minute on what you were referring to, that would be good. And just to finish, sort of practical examples, and I might join Raymond on the naughty step here as well, because I'm slightly digressing, and I hope the ward manager gives me 30 seconds leeway. But I've been struck in my time as a councillor, for example, the paperwork that candidates for teacher interviews require to submit is extraordinary. It really is vast. I need to be blunt. I'm not sure personally that it all gets absolutely read word for word. And the second point are the school plans, which I think we've had an online conversation about some months ago, Nikki. I think it was with yourself. Just again, the amount of work that they seem to have to be put into them. I just have a question mark. Seb's sort of looking a bit puzzled, but it just seems to me, as an outsider, there's a heck of a lot of work involved there. And I'm just glad you raised the point, Nikki, and I wish you well with your efforts. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Matthew. I'll come to Struan now and then come back to Nikki and Alison and Seb.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got one point for clarification and then a question. We were talking very, very briefly about the positive destinations, which I know the committee puts a lot of scrutiny and I think we've got a lot of confidence in. Can I just confirm that according to the report, it's 1819 that is the most recent data that we've got that suggests that the return from July 2019 is the most up to date. So therefore, Raymond, I think your question around about the impact of COVID, we've not even seen that on the return yet, and I'm conscious that there's a 6-month lag time effectively. And that kind of goes on to my question, might be one more for Sebastian and your students. Looking at the traditional makeup of positive destinations from Caithness, we've always had a fair proportion of people going away and having ambitions to go away to university. we've always had a strong college sector, and we're very fortunate that apprenticeships are something that have been widely adopted here. How are you seeing the attractiveness of university, given that the kind of traditional learning environments have been completely disrupted? Because I'm conscious that, you know, I've got quite a few young people who've come to me with different bits of casework, and it seems to be that they've still got a huge amount of ambition, but they're very, very uncertain about how they want that to I suppose, turn into a positive destination, which I have to be honest, if I was in their shoes, I think I'd be very, very confused and kind of understandably a bit concerned about what the future's going to hold. So I'm just wondering, from an anecdotal point, Sebastian, how's that looking for students?
Okay, thanks Matthew and Struan. I'll hand back over to Alison and Nikki and Seb.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Rees, thank you for your question there just now. So in terms of reducing bureaucracy, I'm really keen to support our head teachers with that, and I'm hoping that Seb will come in behind me and reiterate that in terms of the wellbeing and supporting our head teachers. So the child planning process is quite a lengthy document, and it's 2 parts. So what we're looking to do is to moderate against other local authorities who have re-looked at their child planning process to take away some of the lengthy paperwork that's required in order to make a decision. What I'd like to do is to probably have more of a multi-agency approach to it and have a conversation rather than having to fill in the paperwork. But of course the statutory paperwork will need to be included, which is part of the young person's voice too. So that's how we'll look at reducing bureaucracy for the child plan. Secondly, the paperwork for the applications, what I'll do is I'll take that back to our HR team as a matter of urgency to reconsider the way that we do our applications. I do know that it is to do with, across each of the local authorities that are asked to fill in that paperwork, but certainly something that I can take back to our HR team around about it. The school improvement planning process and the standards and quality process, what we've done is we've reduced the template for that, and we'll look to continue to reduce it based on feedback that we've had from our head teachers. And I'm seeing Seb smiling there just now. So Seb is one of the head teachers who managed to get his paperwork in time. And of course, it's not just about the paperwork, it's about the conversations that you then have, through that paperwork. So we are working on that. Head teacher wellbeing is at the forefront of what we're doing, and as part of the Caithness Pathfinder project, and in relation to some of the discussions at full council, all of our head teachers within Caithness and Sutherland will be given the opportunity to go onto the mental health first aid course. So we're looking to talk about that this afternoon at the project board, and also all of our young people, as I committed to previously, within 3rd and 4th year will be given the opportunity to look at the Mental Health and Wellbeing Award. And again, I think that goes towards the whole wellbeing agenda. Councillor Markey, I completely agree with what you said, in terms of the positive destinations. We've had this discussion before in terms of the reports that come to, committees. I think what I'd like to do in consultation with some members is to relook at that format. We're talking about data that happened last year, and what I'd really like to do in terms of the verbal feedback today is to give you live data, so to be talking about the most up-to-date data, because it is pretty pointless to be talking about a year behind. And you're right, we still don't know what the impact of COVID is on our young people. What we are finding is that a number of young people are staying on at school. So those young people that were kind of on the edge of 4th year, some of them in 5th year that would traditionally leave school have chosen to stay on school, and that's right across the Highland Council. So that has had impact on our staffing and our resourcing, and we're looking at that carefully, on a kind of monthly basis. So I would say that's been quite a big impact on us, but we won't know until the next sort of couple of months fully what that's going to look like. But I'll make that commitment to relook at our reporting format to have more live, up-to-date data for you, because you can have a better conversation. Seb, I don't know if you maybe just want to come in, in terms of WIC, just to update Councillor Markey.
I will. Yeah. Technically, you've answered the question the way I was going to say. What we have noticed is that we've got a number of pupils in the 6th year this year that stayed, that in the past historical looking would be a smaller number, and I think that the impact is the lockdown in March, the businesses being closed. And I would say that not necessarily that we've noticed the pupils planning to go to further and higher education, that group of pupils being the group of people that's been impacted the most, but maybe pupils who would have any other plans being unknown, how would that impact, is chosen to stay a little bit longer. And it's very possible that will be the case again for next year. But as Nikki said, it's very difficult to comment with any accurate data yet at this stage, as we've had the lockdown in March. And at this stage, we were, when in terms of a senior school, we were nearly completed. The school year was completed, albeit there was no exams. The qualifications were provided that, based on the estimates that teachers put forward. So the plans of the students didn't change in the perspective of going to universities. There is the fear as well, and families worrying about sending pupils from the discussion with the families, sending pupils away at those current times. But to measure the real impact and how many pupils would choose to stay because of that locally in Caithness and maybe go to the college rather than further education is too early to say for me yet, to be very honest. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Regarding the data, we did mention it, or we discussed at last Caithness Area Committee that we could have a look and review the data that comes through. And obviously, Nikki, you touched on the subject of ASN and gathering some more information on that point as well. So I think that's something that we can take up offline, and I'll take an action to organise some further discussion around that, bearing in mind that I know that officers are all really busy with COVID, and we'll try not to take up too much of your time, but it would be helpful if we could look at the format of the reporting. I'm conscious of time. Is everyone happy for us to move to the recommendations? Good. I think following Alex's guidance, we need to take it as two separate reports. So we have the formal Wick Area School Group Overview Report, circulated report, dated 22nd December 2020. We're invited to scrutinise and note the content of the report. Are we happy, first of all, to do that? And okay, I'm seeing nodding. And are we happy to note the contents of the verbal update? Alex, is that sufficient for the record of the meeting?
Yes, that's good, Chair. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. Members, I think we'll take maybe a 5-minute comfort break. Could we come back at 11:45? And then we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the Town Centre Fund item 7. Okay, we'll be back at 11:45. Just stay connected and turn your videos off. Welcome back, everyone. We'll go to item 7, Town Centre Fund, and I think we have Alan Webster.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. You'll be pleased to know it's a short paper before you today. Just giving you an update on the Town Centre Fund. You'll probably remember late last year, the Scottish Government allocated the Council another £1 million, just over £1 million. And early in November, E&I committee agreed the distribution of those funds to area committees. The fund this time round is a wee bit different to the first tranche that you'll remember, and as far as this forms part of the Scottish Government's National Economic Stimulus package. So because of that, there are very tight timescales associated with it, and the funds essentially need to be committed by the end of March and spent by the end of September. So just by way of a refresher, Caithness committee was allocated £56,104, and the eligible settlements are the same as last time, Thurso and Wick. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to really discuss the second tranche of funding in any great detail before Christmas, because diary commitments, we couldn't get a mutually convenient time in the diary. We did have an exchange of emails between ourselves, and the general consensus at that time, the feeling was that given the sum of money and the very tight timetable, that to mitigate potentially not being able to commit the funds, that either existing Town Centre Fund projects potentially be offered the chance to either add value to the project, or if we knew that existing TCF projects were experiencing projected overspend, those would be prioritised. Or alternatively, we look at established local priorities that could be delivered by the Highland Council. And in those email exchanges, CCTV was highlighted as one of the key areas that could be followed up quite quickly by the end of this financial year. So if I move to section 6 of the report, essentially that covers the kind of two areas that I just mentioned there. Now, 126 High Street in Wick, which is an existing TCF project, was facing a projected overspend and is facing a projected overspend. I think I briefed members in that regard. Essentially, the issue that we're facing there is when 126 High Street was demolished, we exposed the gable end of the adjoining property, and when that happens, you don't quite always know what you're going to uncover. And unfortunately, what we did uncover was a higher degree of deterioration to the stonework and a need for more substantive permanent repairs to be made to that gable end. So that has been estimated at £12,000. So essentially £11,000 for the works, £1,000 for the professional fees. So the paper recommends that Highland Housing Alliance, who are the grantee on that project, be awarded £12,000 from this second tranche of funding to allow the project to be completed in its entirety before the site is transferred to Wick Development Trust. And in terms of the council-led projects and the CCTV side of things, I don't have a detailed proposal to table today, primarily because there is a significant piece of work being undertaken by the council just now and partners to review all Highland public space CCTV provision and monitoring arrangements. Now, I am assured by the officers concerned that that work is being progressed and that a detailed proposal would be available for your consideration by the middle of next month. In fact, it is hoped that the detail would be available for discussion at a ward business meeting very early in February. So the paper recommends that the residual sum, if members are minded to agree 126 High Street, that the residual sum of £44,104 is earmarked for CCTV in Wick and Thurso, essentially to enhance the existing provision and make any improvements where necessary, and that a detailed proposal be brought before you for consideration at a special meeting of Caithness Committee in the middle of the month, middle of February. That concludes all I've got to say just now, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'll hand over to members for questions and comments. Raymond?
Well done, Alan. Look at what we've managed to do in a year and a half, Chair. Certainly in Wick Town Centre, nobody ever thought that there was a consideration that we would never be able to do it. And here we are at Caithness Caithness Area Committee, and we're talking about buildings that have now been demolished when we were wondering how we were ever going to do it. So hats off to you, Alan, and the rest of the town centre team. We're full of praise for the officers this morning. There must have been something in the porridge that we ate. But well done. It's been a tough job, but we've got there, and there are still questions out in the public that can be answered over the fullness of time in terms of what's happening, how is it going forward. But I have to say, in a recent dialogue I had online, it's simply because in the passage of time, because these things do take time, that sometimes we forget what's actually been reported very fully and very clearly in the local press. So the information has been put out to the local public. It's just that sometimes when we're moving on from, well, we've pulled them down, we're putting around shutters around them to protect them and what have you, what's happening next? But that's not for us. The council's done the bit that it's needed to do with the Highland Housing Alliance, and it's now over to other parties to take that forward and keep the public informed on that. So well done to you and the team for getting it to the position that we managed to get it at. I would just simply like to agree that we have that special meeting. We don't need to consider. I think that's going to be, and I've just put it in the chat to the chair, and hope that the members just simply agree to having that special meeting. On the CCTV, I think that that's an opportunity that has gifted itself to us. I think that the public want to see something very tangible and that is demonstrably deliverable. And we've already shown, we've demonstrated that we have delivered with the money that we got from the Town Centre Fund in the first tranche. They know that we can deliver these projects. Therefore, the funding going towards the upgrade of the CCTV and working with John Allen and his team on that is going to be something that the public will be appreciative of. Certainly, we know that there's works going on in the south bank of the river, both in terms of the vandalism that's been going on with the play park over there, and also the planned upgrades and work by volunteers on the fountain. We've also got future investment that we're looking in terms of the public toilets, and also in the investment that we've already delivered in the with the car park area there, and also what may be coming off with Sustrans and Hightrans in the middle of the town. The CCTV is essential to trying to protect those investments and any future investments. I don't think anybody can disagree with our consideration to invest in that. And I'd like that on the public record through this recording and saying that at this meeting. So well done. I'm fully supportive of this. And I would just say, let's move to agree that item number 2 of the recommendations is that we are going to have that special meeting. Thanks very much, Alan. Well done.
Thanks for that, Raymond. Do any other members have points? I'm not seeing any other hands up. No. Okay, well, somebody's hand keeps going up and back down again.
I don't think you're catching my hand.
Sorry, Donny, I'm not seeing you come in now.
It's all right. I'm delighted what Raymond, I'm delighted what Raymond said about CCTV. I'm delighted that it's going ahead because it's well out of date, and it'll benefit Thurso quite some bit if we can get this done. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I agree, Donny and Raymond, and it was really clear. I was project champion for the Sustrans street design project through in Wick, and it was really clear from the public feedback that there was a demand and appetite for CCTV. Most of the comments referenced that this is a nice thing to do, but what's the point if it's going to get vandalised? But CCTV also has a role in protecting the public as well, and I know it's been important in tracing missing persons and things in the past. So it has a huge value, and I'd be really happy to continue that conversation. I appreciate the time skills were tight to get a detailed proposal to us today, but I think we have a date penciled in the diary of 19th of February for a special meeting to agree the detail of the CCTV. So if we could just agree that today, we'll be able to move forward. So it's, hang on, I'll find the formal wording here somewhere. We're invited to consider and agree the proposed additional town centre fund expenditure for 126 High Street, and consider arranging a special committee meeting to consider council-led projects to benefit remaining town centre fund investment. Are we all happy just to agree that?
Agreed. Yeah.
Agreed.
Hey, that was nice and easy. We
Well,
email
I
you the really hard questions, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the kind words, Raymond.
You're welcome. Well done.
Yeah,
Cheers.
absolutely.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 8, and that's the COVID-19 response update from Caithness Voluntary Group and the Community Partnership. And thank you very much for your patience waiting until 12 o'clock to come in. We appreciate it. So I'll hand over to, is it Alan, Ian, Martin, all three?
Morning, Nicola. I don't know who wants to go first.
Morning, Alan.
Do you want to go first, Alan?
Yeah, no bother then. Yeah. Right. So yes, we had our first resilience meeting of the year on the 12th, and it was a well-attended meeting, and we will continue to meet on a fortnightly basis. Clear feedback from the community that people were struggling with the continued isolation. I noted Margaret Sutherland and Dunbeath, who commented that some of the older members of the community were aging rapidly. I think the terms used was aging in dog years, which is, quite sad. Other community representatives confirmed that people were worried about going out since the latest lockdown and were looking for support. Prior to that resilience meeting, we had been in touch with all the groups that had previously been working in the community just to check their readiness to support people in the current lockdown. I'm delighted to say that all the groups were ready and prepared to provide that support. The only gap we had was around what PPP were doing in WIC. So I'm glad to see that I've now received confirmation from Katrina that they will be back providing shopping support and prescriptions, picking up. So that is good, and I think I'll let Alec know that as far as the Highland Council is concerned, because the Highland Council were picking up the shortfall for a week or so. I've also learned that Halkirk Village Committee are now providing support in their area in the form of meals to elderly and the vulnerable, lunch snacks for all school children, and help with shopping. So that is a new development. Last year, Thurso Development Trust were reaching out to that area, and they did a great job. I think this is a positive development. We're heading into potentially poorer weather, so it's easier for local people who will know their community to kind of support that community. So I think that's really good. One of the issues that was raised was the absence of food supplies to people shielding in this lockdown from the Scottish Government. And that was putting extra pressure on the community group. So that hopefully will get fed back. Whether that will make any difference or not, I don't know. Caithness continues to get supplies of non-perishable food from Seafine down in, Seafine stands for Community Food Initiative East. I think they're an Aberdeen-based group that provide food to this community sector. So that's currently going to PPP, Thurso Development Trust, and Caithness Community Connections in Leicester, and then been shared out from there. We're also going to be receiving 4 pallets of sanitary products, and that is going to be shared out once received, so that's all good. At the meeting, Caithness Food Bank confirmed that they're well stocked and able to help the groups, which is what they've been doing for the last 9 months. The Mental Health Action Group are continuing to work away and are making progress developing their mental health hub. This is going to be an interactive hub where instead of links to national websites, it will have a much more local flavour. Videos are being prepared allowing local groups to explain in simple terms the help that they can provide. So that's in progress. A number of organisations, including CVG, have been taking part in the Connecting Scotland project, where tablets and Chromebooks have been donated to young families, older people, people that were previously shielding, that weren't previously online. I think CVG, we put out exactly 100 devices in the last 6 months, and we've got a further request in for another 72. I know Thurso have given out devices, Thurso Development Trust, Ormley are also involved. So I think, it's another positive over the last few months. I've got to thank everybody so much for the funding received for the transport for getting older people to the vaccine appointments. That funding came through on Monday, and by Wednesday we already had 26 people now booked in for their appointments in the next few days, and that was before it was in the newspaper, so that is really exciting. Dunbeath Centre are also working on with their GP and getting organised for, I think, next Tuesday's their big day out in Dunbeath. So I say it's all very exciting stuff. It's certainly not an easy time, but I think the community has pulled together and is working really well with our statutory partners to try to support as many people as possible. I've got one final thing, and a slightly lighter note. Most of you will be aware of the It's Okay Not to Be Okay poster that the Mental Health Action Group prepared last autumn time. And that was widely shared. And this week I was alerted of an identical poster prepared in the Black Isle, right down to the exclamation mark that I think Caroline held in our one. So different photos, of course, different faces, but the poster was exactly the same. So they say imitation is the best form of flattery. So that's just the final point. But that's the kind of update from me. If there's any questions, or if Ian or Martin want to add anything.
Just very briefly, Alan, if you remember, Nicola, you and I were involved in a joint call with some of our Ross-shire colleagues back in sort of October, November time, I think. I'm just wondering if that poster is a kind of output from some of the stuff you were talking about on that call, because there's an important lesson that we're trying to learn across the patch here.
Yeah, it might well be, and I think it's a great thing. It's all good if we can share resources, and we saw that in the resilience effort with Thurso Developing Resources, Thurso Development Trust, and then sharing it out across the community. We're all working to the same goals, so it's really good. Everybody's picking up the baton from Caithness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the only thing I would add from an HIE and a community planning partnership perspective is that certainly from HIE's point of view, we've moved from administering the Scottish Government's Supporting Communities Fund, which was really very successful in Caithness and Sutherland, to administering the Scottish Government's Communities Recovery Fund. And although we've got, I think there's only 3 approvals in Caithness so far for that fund, they're all quite chunky approvals. Homestart Caithness, Northlands Creative Glass, and Leibster, Lather and Clythe Community Development Company, and that's really good because that's effectively the successor program to the Supporting Communities Fund, and it's still open, so you can still make applications to that fund. And I think, as Alan said, we had the latest resilience call, and Martin was updating folk on the application process for that as well. And we may well see, now that we're into that second lockdown, there'll be more applications to that fund. So that remains our focus. I don't know, Martin, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, just very briefly on that point. That fund is still open with a deadline of 12th of February, and it's for project activities that ends no later than the 31st of May. And we're trying to push that quite hard. The take up on it has not been to the same extent as Supporting Communities Fund was. I'm expecting to see a few more applications come in though, but there's various reasons for that, and don't need to go into it. But obviously, there's other grants on the go. Highland Council have resilience grants. There's the wind farms, and also a lot of the groups have been working with the underspend for the Supporting Communities Fund to keep these activities ongoing. But yeah, like Alan, Ian, happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for that. I'll go to Carl and then Raymond.
Thanks, Nicola, and James, thank you very much. You know, I always think back to, excuse me, March last year, and the circumstances we faced were incredibly difficult. And when you just consider how we've progressed, you know, as a county, excuse me, I'm thinking about the links. You know, in most recent meeting, we had the Resilience Committee, agencies involved, and we were identifying challenges, and then, you know, making the links for possible solutions right up the Scottish Government, and it's incredible. So And you know, that in itself feeds into how I think we can build on localism. You know, once we go beyond COVID, I think it's fantastic how Caithness has reacted. So we've got a real good opportunity. So just once again, many thanks. Okay.
Thanks, Carl. Raymond?
Yep. When you're involved in the programme, I have declared my interest, but it's non-financial, and I don't think I think it's wholly inappropriate that that we acknowledge the work that everybody's doing to be able to support this. Martin, you were mentioning there just now about the community's recovery funding and the fact that we haven't received so many applications for that at the moment. I think that there's a key difference. The supporting of the lockdown last year and the availability of funds and the thanks that we should owe CVG as well in assisting to make those funds available to groups who, in terms of their structure, were maybe not quite up, not at that position where they could qualify as individual organisations, but the CVG stepped in to help in that. It was valuable, really valuable to get that essential support out to the community. But I think this we've gone into a lockdown again. So we've actually reversed in real terms. It can be said that we've actually reversed the recovery programme, or we've reversed the position to be back into a position of delivering the resilience, and the recovery will come after that. And I know that this is a bid in. This is a bid in funding, which is different as well. And I think that's where the timing of the lockdown and what the funding is for has maybe collided. I would value maybe yourself and Ian commenting on that. It may be the case. Is there an ability to be able to extend that application deadline? Because certainly a lot of maybe Alan might have a comment on this as well, given a lot of the input from the organisations that are working through the TSI, they may not be in a position to actually seriously look at recovery again until around about the Easter period. And certainly, Alan, from the discussions at the TSI, a lot of us, instead of doing this 2 weeks and then review or 4 weeks and then review, we've needed the consistency of support knowledge to our communities. So a lot of us have just committed to the Easter time because of the dark nights and the weather and the social well-being issues. So we're delivering resilience support, and I don't see the recovery really kicking in until at some point around about Easter time, depending on what the Scottish Government's information is. Might that be a fair assessment? And if not, what may I otherwise read into that?
Thanks, Sorry, I was just going to come to you, Ian, and then Martin.
Yeah, just I think you're absolutely spot on, Raymond. I think to call it a recoveries fund was a reflection on where we were back in September last year when that fund was announced. And I don't think arguably some of us might have thought that, but I don't think any of us thought we would be in the position we're in at the moment. So you're absolutely right. It's all about resilience still and for the foreseeable future. And what we've been doing in the background is just making the point to Scottish Government, who already are in agreement, I think, that this is still a resilience effort, and therefore we're being as flexible as we can with the recoveries fund, talking about what is effectively still resilience work. So I think we're being pretty flexible within the current structure of the fund, and also hoping to talk to particularly Scottish Government about deadlines and potentially extending deadlines. It's not in our gift to do that, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Thanks, Ian. Martin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, quite naturally. That covered a lot of the points I planned to cover as well. But hopefully all the material we are sending out now about the community's recovery fund should reflect that no emergency response activities are still eligible for this. And just for picking up Ian's point, this deadline seems to stand, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you know, nothing is coming after it if needs are still there. And then, hate to put Alan on the spot here, but I think the offer of the TSI offices kind of trying to coordinate those partnership bids into the fund, I think that still stands. Alan, is that right?
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly we'll do anything that we can do to help. So we managed before to hand out the money. I was trying to keep some money back for the Christmas party, but Raymond was having none of it. So yeah, no, that's certainly, if we can help in that front, just give us a shout.
Can I just make one more point, is that apart from the community resilience support, we're also involved, like the council, in providing business resilience support. And I was on a call this morning with colleagues from Council and Business Gateway, just reflecting on the huge volume of individual grant funds that are being announced and created, a couple of which we'll be involved in next week. And I know the council, I think the Cabinet Secretary for Finance announced 9 separate funds, and she's written out to businesses across Scotland on that yesterday. So the next few weeks are going to be absolutely focused on delivering funding to both businesses and communities.
Thanks very much. And if I can just add to that, taking us back full circle a little to talking about the strength of the community response. Carl mentioned localism, and I've made this point before that one of the reasons this was so successful, and the reason this is so successful, is because it's genuinely community driven and genuinely ground up. And I think it applies far more widely than just the COVID response to Highland Council. And when we talk about localism, what do we actually mean and how are we going to put it into practice? And this is a model that could apply across everything that we do as a council and should apply across everything we do as a council. Okay, anybody else want to contribute? Shall we move on? Okay, thank you very much for your time as always, guys. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
So we will move on to item 9, which is the Conservation Area Management Plan for Wick. And I think we have Sarah here with us.
Hello, Chair. You do have Sarah, but it will be myself leading or introducing the paper today.
Okay, Andrew, thank you. Go ahead.
I'll start with an apology, first of all, for my broadband connection. I currently have 3 kids on Chromebooks vying for bandwidth, plus my other half also on a call. So I hope that that it stands up to the pressure and you can hear me clearly. So
if not,
yeah,
Andrew,
so
just
today,
take your video off if it does start breaking up by turning your video off, but we can hear you just now.
Great, brilliant, thanks. So today we're asking members for approval to begin a minimum 6-week public consultation for the Wick Pulteney Town Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan. The Council has a statutory duty under the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Scotland Act to formulate and publish proposals for the preservation, management and enhancement of conservation areas. And so these reports before you today, they've been produced to satisfy this duty. In addition, they're also a requirement of the funding received from the Heritage Lottery Fund and also Historic Environment Scotland for the Townscape Heritage Scheme and the Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme. So this also, and really quite importantly, satisfies the conditions of grant funding and ensures that these legacy projects can be wound up. So the reports themselves, they were undertaken by a conservation accredited consultant. We felt it would be quite helpful to have an independent assessment of the conservation area, given the grant funded schemes that have been in operation over the last 10 years or so, if not longer, and to highlight where the funding had been successful in improving the built environment, and also where the problems and issues remain unaddressed and where future regeneration efforts should be focused for best effect. So I do appreciate that these are long and detailed reports, but they also reflect the importance of this particular conservation area and also the complicated set of issues that it presents. So I really hope members will see from the committee report that from the very start of this particular project to put these reports together, we really have prioritised community engagement and involvement, and that the reports have been very much informed and developed in tandem with a quite broad stakeholder group throughout. And the stakeholder group, they played a really active role in the project. They very much influenced the direction of the reports, especially the issues identified in the management plan, and throughout their input has been absolutely invaluable. And just to give you some idea of the breadth of groups in the stakeholder group, as well as including representatives from, of course, the council, including local members, for which we thank you very much. It also included the Community Council, Wick Heritage Association, the Nucleus Archive Centre, Wick Harbour Trust, Beatrice Offshore Wind, Caithness Chamber of Commerce, the Caithness Voluntary Group, and also the Argyle Square Community Association, who are great. The group was really engaged, they were really positive and supportive, and like I say, many of the issues raised in the management plan came directly from discussions from that group. So we'd really like to extend our thanks to them all for their invaluable input. Also, again, pre-pandemic, we held a public drop-in session at Mackay's to allow residents to come and tell us what they thought of the conservation area, where they thought there were issues, what they thought were the positives, and how they felt it could be managed more positively into the future. And really good mix of residents and business owners. And what came through, I think, most strongly was a real sense of pride in their local area and a real understanding of how unique and distinctive Pulteney Town is, but also how much it had changed over the years, some for good and some for bad. And again, the management plan reflects the concerns and issues being raised and with the ongoing management of the area. Before we finalised this draft, the stakeholder group was also given the opportunity to comment on and feed back into these reports. So, say, hopefully you'll agree it's already received a good deal of scrutiny from local groups and residents. Just to very briefly set out the purpose of the appraisal, it's two parts. We've got the appraisal and the management plan. The purpose of the appraisal is just really simply to define the special interest of the conservation area, along with those elements that really contribute to its character and appearance, which are the bits that we as a local authority have a statutory duty to protect. And it also identifies the issues that threaten those special qualities. The other thing it does is it assesses the current designation and determines whether the existing boundary accurately captures what makes the area special, or equally if it includes areas that no longer contribute to its special interest. The manager goes into more detail on the area's strengths and weaknesses and where the opportunities and threats really sit. And it provides strategy and guidance on the management of change and development in the conservation area. So, for example, opportunities for planning action, opportunities for development, where we could really concentrate on enhancement of the conservation area. So, within the committee report, you should see there's a summary of the findings. But I suppose if I can briefly summarise that summary, what the appraisal has really clearly identified is that Pulteney Town, it's unique, it's special. It's Thomas Telford's only fully executed town plan for the British Fisheries Society, and as such it remains an area that is of immense architectural and historic interest. Remarkably, the integrity of the original plan and the built form of Pulteney Town remains largely in place. The design of the 19th century harbour is still intact. And the majority of Pulteney Town's built heritage, most of which is Georgian, but the construction methods and the architectural detailing, the materials, they're individual to Pulteney Town. It's not something we see in any other area, in any other context. And again, what is remarkable is really that these buildings, they survive on the lots on which they were originally built. It is as Telford designed it. And it really is difficult to overstate just how important and significant historically and architecturally Pulteney Town is. And it's probably a significance which is really best measured on a national rather than a regional or local scale, as is the case with many of our conservation areas. It really is head and shoulders above most of the built heritage that we have in the Highlands. As I mentioned earlier, the appraisal considers the appropriateness of the boundary and whether the designation has been correctly defined. We are aware that the boundary amendments are often one of the most eagerly anticipated, perhaps controversial parts of any conservation area appraisal. And in this case, we are recommending that there are a number of extensions to the boundary. And this is to encompass areas that are contemporary with Telford's original plan, and they're contemporary with areas and streets that are already included within the conservation area. So it's a small number of really good quality residential blocks. The harbour itself, the former drying green, which sits to the front of Smith Terrace, and this area was highlighted as being of particular interest by the stakeholder group. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the map which details this, but it's on page 92 of the appraisal. And so the areas we're proposing to extend are marked as C, D, F and G. But there's also areas that are marked on that map that we're not proposing to take forward to public consultation, which are marked as A, B and E. And we feel that they're just not, they're divorced from the main conservation area, and just in terms of management, it's not really practical to do so in planning terms. So the conservation area does, of course, have some very significant issues that affect its character and appearance, the majority of which I'm sure members will be very familiar with, including vacancy and underuse, inappropriate development. There's the quality of the public realm and also the management of green space. And the management plan does set out opportunities and methods to address these issues through planning action, engagement with local communities, guidance, strategy, and also looking for other funding opportunities to actually look at dealing with these issues head on. So it includes a detailed analysis as well as a series of proposed actions to encourage the future positive management of the conservation area. So hopefully members will agree that we can proceed with a minimum 6-week public consultation. Realise it's not the best time to be carrying out public consultations given the lockdown and COVID. So we will do everything we can to make sure that the reports are made available to all interested stakeholders. They'll be available online via the council's consultation portal. We will put adverts in the local press, social media, and also use the contacts within the stakeholder group to make sure it's advertised as widely as possible, and to really make sure we capture everyone that has an interest. We also propose to take what's quite an unusual step, but of writing to all of the properties in both the existing and the proposed conservation area boundary to inform them of the consultation and to ask them to input into the consultation if they wish to do so. And hopefully this will enable us to capture the majority of people, if not everybody, that has an interest in the reports. Thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Does anyone have any questions? Raymond?
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for the report. It is meaty and extensive and a lot of reading. I have to say as well, for those who are not knowledgeable of the history of Wick, it's a really good document to give them an understanding of how the whole area of Wick has developed from being a place of thatched houses or turf roofed houses. This is a project. This is something that I did. I came across my own dissertation. I did one for college many years ago. I won't say exactly how many years ago, but I came across it just when I was up in the loft at Christmas time there just now. This is the exact area that within an area that I was actually doing a lot of work in historic research. I'm glad to see that it has been extended. I think that there is an argument for it to be that it could be further extended, but and I'd value your comment on how manageable that would be. And the reason that I say that, Andrew, is because where you've extended I haven't got it in front of me, obviously I can't speak to you at the same time as have a look at this, but from my recollection, where you've now included areas like Grant Street, which is known as the Duxie, but I'm not quite sure. I'll try and have a look at this to see if we can. Areas of distinct architectural acknowledgement actually goes right up to the Huddart Street and in the old areas of the named places from the Board of the Fisheries, Albert Street, Rutherford Street, these areas aren't included, and yet they are extensively ruinous and run down in many areas. Is there a reason that we haven't actually looked to extend it that far up into what was the old town of Pulteney Town? With the exception of that, I don't have an issue. I think that the borderline is essentially correct, and I'm glad that it's been extended to take in the areas that you suggested. One final question is there any reason that you've got it running through the back? Just give me a second, I'll refer to that again. No final question. That's it as it is. Thank you very much.
I'm not seeing any other hands up just now. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll let you respond to that, Andrew.
Chair, my hand was up, but I don't think you're seeing my hand. Sorry. No matter.
Johnny, I'm sorry, I can't see your hand at all.
No,
but please
it was up.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's just Andrew. It's a quick one. I noticed that you've been doing WIC. When is Thurso going to be done? Conservation area. I've asked for this since years, and we're not any further on now. And when I asked it, thanks, Andrew. Could you answer that question?
Shall I answer that now, Donny? Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, just answer Raymond and Donny. That would be fine. Thanks, Andrew.
Sure. Well, if Donny, if I cover that one first, you'll be pleased to know that that Thurso is the next on our list. We have done assessment of Thurso and which goes to show that we're not always looking to extend conservation areas. Actually, the initial assessment for Thurso looks like we may actually reduce the area quite significantly by probably around 50%, removing the northern and then just really concentrating on the gridiron town plan around the main part of Thurso instead, and also actually removing some of the residential areas to the west, if I recall. Which again have just seen an awful lot of alteration, and they've probably lost their special character really. So it's coming next. We're in the process of finalising the report, ready for an initial consultation, and but hopefully in the next few months, all being well.
And will you consult with the local councillors?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll try and do something similar as we have done for WIC, identifying local stakeholders and then doing a full consultation again once we have the reports finalised. Yeah. Councillor Bremner, it's a very good question. We try to draw a balance between areas of the conservation area that obviously feed directly into the reason it was designated into the first place, which is the original plan. From memory, and I would have to go back and look at the historic maps, I think the area you refer to is actually a little bit later and wasn't actually put in by Telford. I may be wrong about that, but I can double check and have a look. But I think it was just outside for that very reason, really. Just it wasn't quite so historically connected with the Telford phase of Pulteney Town. But I will double check.
Okay, are you happy with that, Raymond? No.
Just a point for clarification: is the conservation area primarily and singularly and primarily to do with Telford? The area, as I understand it, at Hudder Street and what they called back then as Upper Pulteney was not. It was part of the onward designs, the onward extension of Pulteney Town, but I'm not so certain that it was actually part of the Telford design. it certainly carries all the hallmarks of the naming of the streets, and the buildings in terms of their period is still very historic. Certainly Huddart Street in respect of Smith Terrace, but they are intrinsically linked. There is an awful lot of the old part there that has subsequently been demolished, and that's now been replaced by Nicholson Street and new housing at Van Sittert Street. But we were one of the first tenants in the new Nicholson Street that was being put up, and at that point I could go out the front door and walk right down to right down to Smith Terrace. You can't do that now; it's a cul-de-sac. But these are on the old areas of Royal Place was much bigger. It's all to do with these were old streets there that were all reshaped, and these new houses have been put up there. But Huddart Street itself has been spared that. It's still, a lot of that is still the old buildings of period. So that's the reasoning behind my question. It wasn't so much linked with Telford per se.
Andrew, do you want to just briefly respond to that, please, if you can?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, quite happy to have a look at it again. I think that area, there were a couple of small areas that we were considering for inclusion in the conservation area, but it was quite fragmented in terms of what survived, and in terms of how well what survived in fabric and that kind of thing. And certainly one of the areas, and I will see if I can very quickly find map. Yeah, there were two areas which were marked on the map as E, which we've decided, or we're proposing to forward, because they're quite divorced from the main area of the conservation area, and you end up almost with floating islands of conservation area designation within an area that otherwise isn't designated. And just from a management point of view, it makes it very, very difficult to really to manage. So and they were around Huddart Street actually. So I suspect they're probably the areas you're referring to. There's no real way of connecting them to the main body of the conservation area without bringing in later development or buildings that have been quite significantly and detrimentally affected, which we don't really want to do, because then that puts people into greater restrictions, and their buildings and their properties don't really warrant those kind of restrictions. So that will be the main reason. But in answer to your earlier question, if it's just about Telford, it's based on Telford and what Telford did for Poultney Town and his design. But yeah, we are quite happy to look at other areas that are of historical importance as well, aren't necessarily directly related to what Telford did, but may be part of just the evolution of Poultney Town in the years that followed.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I think reading the report, it's such a long and detailed report, and what struck me really was just how special and unique the environment actually is in Wick, Poultney Town. And I think we need to, and you actually communicated that really eloquently in your presentation as well. And I think we need to be far, far better at promoting it. You know, other areas like Edinburgh's Newtown, I know it's not Telford, but you know, the planned environments, I guess they're celebrated all over the world. And I think very, very few people, even in Caithness, really recognise what we have right on our doorstep. And actually it is on my doorstep, because I noticed my own front door was in the report, and I have painted it since you took the photo. So yeah, I think we've got a task to see how we can promote it better and make sure people discover it and get some more signage up. So thanks very much for that. I'm not seeing any more hands up. So we're asked to consider the content and findings of the CAA. We're asked to consider the content, findings and recommendations of the CAMP, and we're asked to approve both for a minimum 6-week public consultation. I would just ask that we could be flexible with that 6 weeks, because I know we've just finished the consultation for the Wick Common Good, or nearly finished the Common Good Fund consultation, and the response has been quite low, and I think that does reflect the fact that we're in lockdown. So I appreciate that you're putting in a lot of effort to be flexible with how you reach people, but maybe we need to consider, if there's not a great response after 6 weeks, maybe extending it a little further.
Quite happy with that, Chair. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, is everyone happy to approve and move on? Good, thank you very much. It was a really interesting report.
Thank you, members.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, last but not least, item 10, the Wick and Thurso active travel plans. And I think we have Neil and Vicky.
Yes, I've held on.
You're still there, Neil.
I'm still here. I'm hanging on in there. Thank you, members, and apologies for the interruption earlier with a phone call that I was trying to make. Multitasking while on a committee doesn't really work very well, so apologies about that. But no, I've enjoyed listening in, and good to get a history lesson of Thomas Telford as well. Thank you, Councillor Bremner. Could I possibly be? I can't share my screen at the moment. If an admin could organise that for me. I've got a short presentation. I appreciate you've got some lunch to get before your next meeting at 1 o'clock. I too have a 1 o'clock with Malcolm. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to do that. It's just a short presentation. Hopefully I can just run through it. I won't say everything I was going to. And if I swap these over, hopefully you can all see that. Anyway, so just a little bit of a welcome to begin with. My name's Neil Young. I'm the Transport Planning Officer based at HQ in Inverness, and Vicky Trelfer is also in attendance, and Vicky is the Active Travel Officer with HyTrans, who's the Regional Transport Partnership. So you've had a copy of both the Wick and Thurso master plans that have been recently refreshed. They'll be uploaded onto the Highland Council website as soon as possible. As you'll see in the report in front of you, there's both the local policy in terms of the Caithness and Sutherland Local Development Plan, where it talks about promoting active travel opportunities, particularly within Thurso and Wick, and development opportunities to make both towns more coherent places. The National Transport Strategy, you'll see it just in the screen in front of you, sets out a sustainable travel hierarchy, which prioritises walking and wheeling, cycling, along with public and shared transport as preferences to single occupancy car journeys. The National Transport Strategy makes it clear that the transport system will help deliver the ambitious climate change agenda and net zero carbon emissions by 2045. So a target there. And if you remember, the Highland Council also declared a climate and ecological emergency. And with everything that's happened, you might have thought that was just last year, but that's almost 2 years ago now that emergency was declared. So emissions must be reduced, and we need to do our best to encourage more sustainable and active travel journeys. So the study area comprised 2 main towns in Caithness, and some of the tasks included a desktop study, which included some demographic analysis, travel to work patterns, public transport information, and traffic accident data. And when considering the different forms of pedestrian and cycle infrastructure throughout the study area and the appropriate levels of intervention, various guidance documents, including Cycling by Design and Designing Streets, were referenced in the consideration of what would be appropriate in terms of widths of footways and carriageways and the cycle infrastructure along the various routes that were considered. Of course, we've had the COVID-19 impact, and there have been spaces for people measures that have been undertaken in both settlements. We were awarded 1.9 million from the Scottish Government to undertake spaces for people, so providing space for physical distancing throughout the Highland area. And Caithness, the interventions we planned there come to about 450,000, so a fair chunk of that 1.9 million. The biggest intervention, which will be implemented hopefully by the end of March this year, will be a 20 mile per hour zone covering the whole of Thurso. So because of COVID-19, engagement was undertaken using an online tool called Commonplace, and virtual site visits to the existing infrastructure were carried out, and of course the 2010 audits and recommendations therein were reviewed. And this is just an overview. I won't go through it, but you'll see just the sort of highlight priorities that were identified in both Wick and Thurso. And you might think, what's a mobility hub? Well, mobility hub offers certain mobility options such as cycle parking, e-bike hire, and information on active travel routes, and maybe some training, etc., for those that are less confident on getting on 2 wheels. So I won't go into that in too detail. There's more details coming up now. Firstly, we're going to look at WIC. Appreciate it's a small map in front of you, but you do have the paper copy. And it's, I was going to talk about the map, but I'm conscious of time, and there's a few rumbling stomachs, I'm sure, as well. So if we just go on to the next slide, the master plan does identify 17 actions along with estimated costings, and they include some what we'd class as easy wins, interventions to improve infrastructure for walking, cycling, and wheeling that cost less than 50,000, along with some more complex interventions. You'll see here the mobility hub costed about £1.5 million. The interventions along with the costings can be found on pages 14 to 16 and on page 76 of the master plan. There was an ad hoc approach to where these interventions were implemented. So the hope is that these master plans are used to direct the developer contributions, ask Transport Scotland for contributions, and the community benefit that could bring from any infrastructure project that they're undertaking. So that's where I can go. We can have a discussion if there's any questions on the various interventions there. Similar for Thurso, a map-based approach showing some of the strategic routes and where we're going to be looking to resurface the footways, quiet streets. I'll go on to just explain what quiet street is in a second as well. But Arup, who are the consultant who worked on both of the master plans, reviewed the previous ones from 2010 and found really that in the last 10 years there had been minimal progress in development of any of the routes that were or the actions that were identified previously. So things have sort of stayed still for active travel in Wick and Thurso. We've got the Wick Street Design project, which is an exciting project that will hopefully come to fruition in the next little while. But let's try and get the active travel infrastructure up to where it could and should be. Again, there's some examples of some of the low cost interventions, but also up to the higher cost ones as well. And that's what it could look like in your towns. Safe crossing, that's just an example, but some of the interventions were linking basically schools. So it could be achieved prioritising the movements of pedestrians and cyclists over the motor vehicle, providing safe crossing points from the residential areas to these what we class as key trip generators, so school, shopping areas, etc. Quiet street, so that would include some signage, some paint on the ground, but also some traffic camming, as you'll see in the top right hand corner there, raised junctions at key locations. Again, street designed based on the transport user hierarchy that we talked about earlier, with the sort of inverted triangle where pedestrians and wheelers are at the top, cyclists and public transport second and third, and then you get the motor vehicles right at the very bottom. The principle of quiet streets is to reduce the dominance and speeds of motor vehicles to make the roads easier to cross and travel along by foot and by bike. And the interventions there are really just signage, speed limits and traffic calming. And the bottom right picture, this is from a path near Inverness, and it just shows what could be achieved with a little bit of elbow grease. I'm not sure you can make it out, but in the background you can see the existing path has suffered from the encroachment of vegetation, meaning a usable width of approximately ½ a metre. But with a bit of work, that could be restored back to what it should be, about a 2.5 metre wide path. And of course, that's important just now when we're thinking of the COVID pandemic and what space is needed for physically distancing. But the audit suggests several locations where this would and could be carried out in both Wick and Thurso. And the advantages are it's cheap. If we get the community involved, they get a bit of ownership of that as well. So recommendations are in the report in front of you. It's a whirlwind presentation, so sorry to rush through it, but I'm happy to take any questions.
No, thanks, Neil, and I appreciate you keeping it brief. There's lots of detail in the report. So I have Struan and then Matthew and then Carl. Struan.
Firstly, Neil, thanks for this. And there's two very substantive. There's so much stuff in here, which is great. I think the big thing for me is knowing the kind of next steps. I know we've got the kind of recommendation as outlined in the papers, but it's just to know where is the jump off point. How do we see this kind of coalescing, and then having the kind of stakeholder discussions, because there's a couple of things here, and I think it was raised under a number of different guises previously around about some of the actions and having that local knowledge as well. It's just knowing exactly how much local knowledge has gone into this. I was looking at the Sir Archibald Road Quiet Street proposal, which obviously would affect Carl quite a bit. But that there's a suggestion that it would be a livable neighbourhood with only industrial and local traffic, but there's lots and lots of commercial businesses at the end, so that just doesn't make sense. I just can't understand how that could possibly be a proposal that could be put on a bit of paper and put in front of us. So it's knowing when are we going to have those sense checks, because I spent most of my my career as a consultant, and I wouldn't be confident in putting some of the stuff that's in front of us here, because I just don't think it's been sense checked. And I'm happy with a lot of it, but I'm also deeply disappointed that there's some obvious things that just shouldn't be in here.
Okay, I'll take Matthew and then Carl and then come back to Neil to respond to that. Thanks, Struan. Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll be as quick as I can. And this is very interesting, the documents, Neil. Thanks to all of you for the work you've done. I suppose it's inevitable we try to sort of, as Struan, we see things that we think could be improved, and that's probably the whole point of this. So very quickly, I had 4 things down. One of them was Sir Archibald Road. Carl is the expert, he knows that area better than any of us, but I personally can't see much potential to reduce traffic there because it's a no-through road. I think everybody who already goes down there is either going to their houses or to the commercial premises that Struan's alluded to. That's the first one. The second one is, and this is probably an obvious question, Neil, but Princes Street, the proposals you've got there, I'm just assuming that the taxi operators and the shopkeepers and other people there will be fully consulted, because I'm aware, and I know Thurso is very different to M&S, but some of the things that have been put in QuickTime and M&S, some have got the thumbs up, some haven't. Thirdly, the proposals from Olney Road leading out to Janetstown, I'm not sure I fully understood it, but it says in the documents that the road, Olney Road, as it refers to, is surrounded by fields. So I think it must be meaning the part of Olney Road out of town, i.e., and this is my point, in the 60-mile-per-hour speed limit. If I understand the proposals correctly, it's suggesting the pathway would be widened to a minimum of 2 meters, but ideally 3 meters. Is that reducing the width of the road? If it's not, fine, but if it is reducing the width of the road, I personally think, putting my old police traffic hat on, I'd be a little bit worried about having the national speed limit along there, but I'm just really flagging that up. And my fourth point is probably going to might cause a bit of disharmony, Chair, so I apologise in advance. And in relation to all the things we've been talking about this morning about COVID and schools, this is relatively minor, but section 3.6 has one line suggesting that suggesting the signs should be bilingual. I could go into the detail, but I won't because time is short. My personal feeling is, for my ward, I can't speak for Ward 3, is the majority of people would prefer one language only signs. And I think, and I'm going to be brief, if we think about tourism, Caithness has a lot of its own attributes: the big skies, the flow country, the Norse heritage, our remoteness, our landscape, and there's something about being a bit different that attracts people. Our slogan is the Energy County, but if you recall at the time, members, we also thought it could be called the Viking County or something similar. So for that reason, I would prefer personally to have single language only signs, because just speaking to people in the ward, I think that would be the preference of the majority. And if I'm wrong, well, okay, I'm wrong. It's a small point, but it refers to section 3.6. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Matthew. If you have an amendment, could you put it in the chat for the meeting, and I'll go to Carl while you do that.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I was going to come to that. I wanted to ask, in terms of the legalities of this and the localism agenda, should it be an amendment that is specific to just Ward 2, or is it county-wide? I think if we're pursuing localism to its finest point, it would be Ward 2, but I'm happy to take advice on that one. And it would simply be that the proposal is for one language, or not bilingual signs, whatever the wording should be.
Okay, I'll go to Carl just now and come back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola, and Neil and Vicky. Thank you very much for the document you produced. It's a lengthy document with a great amount of detail. Nicola, I'm a wee bit uncomfortable. I did have quite a bit to say, and I was going to lodge a motion, but I'm really conscious of the time and being committed to attending a meeting at 1 o'clock. Is there a solution here? We've heard several points raised in regard to Thurso. I would imagine that Vicky and Neil would value a longer conversation. Is there some way we can accommodate that? It is a very important, so there are potential for health improvements, environmental improvements are fantastic here. But I do think we should give it more justice. But look, I accept that I've committed to attending a different meeting. But can I just get some guidance on that, Nicola, please?
Okay, I'm wondering if possibly we have a special meeting of Caithness Area Committee on the 19th of February for the Town Centre Fund. It's going to very much, I would think, overlap with some of the active travel considerations. These are some substantive points, so maybe if it doesn't cause a great problem for the officers, we could delay and have further conversation over the next few weeks. But Raymond's got his hand up, so I'll go to Raymond and then I'll come back to Neil and see what Neil thinks. Raymond?
Are we talking about this being held over?
If it allows for fuller discussion and members to be more comfortable with the papers that are in front of us, perhaps, yeah?
Then I'll hold my comments to then.
Okay. Struan, can I come back to you?
Sorry, Nicola, it's an old hand. Sorry.
Okay. I mean, one point I would make is that the draft documents were emailed out to all the members several weeks ago. I know that I read through the proposals and did provide some feedback myself. So we have had opportunity to provide feedback and changes prior to this meeting. But if members aren't comfortable with what's in front of us, I'll go to Neil and see what Neil's thoughts are on further discussion. Neil, could you respond to some of these points being raised, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. What I failed to say in my presentation, and Vicky, apologies about this, the only way these master plans were updated was due to funding from HighTrans. So we appreciate HighTrans very much, the contribution they've made, and also ARIP, who have put together the updates. Yeah, I'm happy to come back and have a chat with everyone. Councillor Mackie, yeah, appreciate there probably is some sense checking needing done. My understanding was that members had been involved in meetings with ARIP to discuss, but apologies if that didn't happen. If not, everyone was invited here, so we can make sure that does happen and we can take that forward. Picking up Councillor Rees, yeah, full consultation. Any of these changes need to have consultation and need to have full buy-in from the public, from key stakeholders. So yeah, nothing. These are ideas of what could happen in your areas. If there was to be path widening, Councillor Rees, the speed limit would have to be sort of taken on board along with that. They wouldn't expect a path where you could take the young kids along and then it's still 60 mile per hour roundabout. So we need to work with Transport Scotland for the trunk roads as well and get their buy-in and some speed reduction as well there. Yes, Inverness, I was going to say we've had some thumbs up, but yes, you're right, we've had a few fingers up as well. So yeah, we've had to adjust things, and yeah, we don't want to. We want all thumbs up for any infrastructure that we put in Wick and Thurso. So yeah, full consultation is definitely required. In terms of the language, I think it was Councillor Rosie that raised that. No, it was Councillor Rees, sorry, was that 2.6 under the implications about the Gaelic, I think, rather than 3.6. But just to say that that's a council policy that the any destination signs, any road name signs are both in English and in Gaelic, and in fact Gaelic I think is at the top of, and then the English is underneath in quite a lot of these signs. So just clarifying that we just have to go with council policy on that. And I think Councillor Bremner was nodding that that is indeed correct. So
okay, Matthew.
Yes, sorry, I don't, don't want to get into a long debate about it, but my understanding, and I do stand to be corrected, is that under the localism agenda, street signage can be decided at a local level. I detect a member from Waterloo who's got a different viewpoint, so I suppose we might need to get legal advice, but I'm 90% sure on my facts, but I stand to be corrected and I'll be the first to back down if necessary.
Members, I'm seeing Matthew and Struan saying very strongly that we have local powers to vary the Gaelic signage, not Gaelic, and Raymond very clearly thinking the opposite. I have to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I would feel much more comfortable if we deferred this decision and had time to go and think about it more carefully. But I note that, Raymond, you've taken your hand back down. We do need to leave at 1 o'clock for this meeting, so is any member greatly opposed to us adjourning this conversation and picking it up at our special meeting on the 19th? Stick your hand up if you're against, please. Matthew, your hand's up, but you're nodding. Are you fine to defer it to the 19th?
Sorry,
my hand's up, but it's been up since about 10 minutes. But
apologies, Willie.
Yeah, just like to say about this report, Neil and Vicky, what I like about it is your calming measures. When we introduced the 20 plenty in Wicktown, there was a lot of criticism. Drivers would not want to slow down from 30, but safety won the day. So I'm very, very keen on your traffic calming measures. And that will certainly help to appreciate this. The slogan is, when in town, slow down. So well done for introducing these traffic calming measures. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I had a couple of questions around the funding of some of these measures, and I know that that's something that's been discussed with officers as well, about the funding that's available and how we make best use of it. There is also the Gaelic question to clear up. So I'm going to propose, for everyone's agreement, that we adjourn approving this report until the 19th of February. Hopefully Neil or Vicky will be able to join us then, but we'll work with you to find a suitable date. Is that, has everyone agreed to that?
Great.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think that concludes, I've got too many screens open now, but I think that concludes our agenda for today. Yeah, because we've taken item 11 already. So I think that's us. Thank you very much. It's been a long morning. I appreciate everyone's time.